Shalom, shalom, shalom. I'm back. Genesis 49 is in the building. Source Gang, 7 Gang in the building. You know how we rock it, man. Back with another episode for you brothers and sisters that's out there that are hungry for information. So first, before I start, I want to apologize to my audience for yesterday. We had a very dogmatic and religious individual on the channel that was very obnoxious, would not allow people to speak. You guys will never have to deal with that again because you know how I have a strict policy here. You can come on and speak whatever doctrine you want to speak. We'll allow other people to talk as well. So I just want to give that quick disclaimer. You guys won't have to worry about that anymore. But today, I wanted to focus this video on the Earth not being 6,000 years old. I used to believe this. I used to staunchly believe this. I was deeply entrenched in the idea and the ideology that the Earth had to be less than 6,000 years old. I would listen to Answers in Genesis. I would listen to other sources that would point to that narrative. But I always had questions, like, for instance, it's really where the flood starts that causes the rift in understanding and the issues. If you're putting the flood 4,400 years ago, that'll put it around 2,400 BCE. And that would cause so many issues because we understand that the flood, if it happened in 2,400 BCE, you don't have enough time for population growth. You don't have enough time for civilization being established on the earth. You don't have enough time for that. The time of Abraham comes around and we're already in the Middle Bronze Age. You understand? I'm talking about 4,000 years ago. So you're saying the Tower of Babel happened, the repopulating of the earth happened, less than 400 years? Never made any sense. And then we have stuff that we know happened 4,000 years ago. We can point to it. We understand that civilization was thriving by then. We understand by 3,000 BCE, which is 5,000 years ago, that civilization was rising in places like Egypt, rising in Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. We talk about it all the time. We debate about it all the time. These places were well before that date. So that lets you know that the flood couldn't have happened in 2400 BCE, or 4,400 years ago. Because again, we had civilizations. We had Nile Valley and Mesopotamian civilizations. If you go even further back behind that, you get to Eridu, which many of us glorify. And Eridu, we say that is a product of some Semitic people being involved in that. That's 5,200 years ago. 1,500 BCE, so about 7,000 years ago. So the further you go back, we're seeing civilization already be implemented. The problem with that is that we understand that the flood destroyed the planet, destroyed the old world. Noah and his 3 sons, according to the biblical narrative. Again, if you're watching this, you don't believe in the biblical narrative, I don't know why you're here. According to the biblical narrative, Ham, Shem, and Japheth came off the ark and they populated the earth. So that would have to take time. And I'm referencing Hugh Ross in this. Do I agree with everything Hugh Ross says? No. But on this point, he makes valid points that are consistent with what we can observe and what we can actually dig up. And I'm all about making strong models or whatnot. So before we get into the information, you know how I do this. We introduce and open up the video with a song. This is Brother Paisley or Paisley. I don't know how to say his name, but the brother has a good song called Big Business. So we're going to play that and then we're going to get into it.
Big business. RSK, let it play, boy. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish you. These commandments that sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish you. These commandments that sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. I wake up and serve me a prayer. Brush my teeth, babe, then I throw on some threads. Walk my face, grab a cup, pour me some yarn. Put on my backpack, then I'm off to the bread. I eat these devils for breakfast. Gotta be careful. Whole lot of blood being shed in the streets. World is so wicked, I weep for the living. I drop a free cheer for the dead. All my white friends in my pocket, or either they loaded on to this black card that I swipe. Say every time that I drop it, the verse will be hitting more harder than problems of life. Rich, I collected 2 pennies from every person that willingly gave me advice. Being afraid and existing my spirit, I'm fearing no man but the Father in Christ. I put in work with the brothers, we stood on them calls, pretending like 9 at night. Teaching our people the gospel, equipped with a camera, some posters, some speakers, and mic. Every time that I see mama, she telling me, son, you gotta walk in the light. Christ, the bread of heaven, keep feeding my spirit, and I wanna low, not a slide. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish you. These commandments that sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish you. These commandments that sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell you I'm an Israelite, tribe of Judah, don't you take it personal. Bleed the blood on these demons, we purging them. Don't entertain Jezebels, we be curving them. Hey, I got a ribbon, she virtuous. In person, this blue life ain't virtual. I can't forget when I heard the truth. I got cut with that word, it got surgical. Conviction can lead to repentance. I pray these verses encourage you. We repented, now we on the vertical. Judah rising, see Isaiah 32. Big business, nothing minuscule. I picked up that pen back in middle school. Guard your light and take heed who you listen to. Watch your mouth and your ears and your vision too. Hashatan and Shalkani won't finish you. In Mortal Kombat, this war is not physical. Gird your loins up and follow the general. Christ, Messiah is coming, that's scriptural. Yeah, you gotta starve your flesh. The real war ain't even started yet. This look like a setup for a second exodus. I'm trying to be where the water at. Let's get it. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish you. These commandments that sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish you. These commandments that sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
All right. Hey, shalom to people that just got on. See the topic, see what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the Earth is not 6,000 years old. It's a lot of contradictions we're going to have to deal with today. And we're going to be dealing with Dr. Hugh Ross's work. And again, I don't agree with every assessment that this brother make. I don't agree with every assessment what anybody make. But what I do see that aligns itself with what we can observe and actually prove, I put that in and incorporate that into my model. Again, I try not to lean on dogmatism. I try to use empirical reality to build and reconstruct models and arguments. You understand? Yeah, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. So, the basic argument against this 6,000-year-old thing. First of all, people will say, well, doesn't the Bible say that the earth is 6,000 years? No, it doesn't. It doesn't explicitly say that the Bible is an age anywhere in the Bible. People try to line up different genealogies and come to that conclusion, but there's an issue with that. We're going to touch on that today. A quick preview on that. When you go into the book of Exodus and it talks about Moses' lineage, it says he came from one of the Levite sons. The problem with that is the Levite sons went into Egypt 400 years before he even existed. So we know that's not the case. That's called a genealogical gap. Another place where you find genealogical gaps is in Genesis 10. You understand? So it may post the ancestor, you understand, of these particular people like Shem, it'll post Shem, and then it'll skip all the way to the fathers of Abraham. That's a genealogical gap. That's time in between that. And we know that's the case because the Tower of Babel was not built in 50 years with a population less than 1,000. That doesn't make any sense. And once you start looking at those facts and analyzing it that way, then you know that age of 6,000 years doesn't make any sense. The flood happening 4,400 years ago doesn't make any sense at all from a chronological standpoint, and a population growth standpoint, and construction standpoint of building the Tower of Babel, the spreading of people, and making the population dense enough to even be these populations that we see. And during Abraham's time, Egypt was already established. It was a working, functioning nation during his time. Mesopotamia was already established. It was a working, functioning meta population during this time. So we can clearly see there was a large amount of time separated from Shem, the progenitor, and Abraham. That's just a clear logical deduction. Between those periods, you had Egypt rise to the status it was in during the time of Abraham. You had the Bronze Age, the Middle Bronze Age happening. You had silver being minted and used as currency. Agriculture was well established. During the time of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they were the only people on the earth. There was none of that. That stuff had to develop and grow. So it didn't happen within 100 years after they got off the boat. Another note is, if you're saying that the Tower of Babel happened in the time of Noah, then you're saying Noah would be the overseer. You understand? That makes no sense. There's no record of Noah rebelling against the Most High like that, because the whole purpose of them was to repopulate and fill the earth, not make a centralized government where everyone stayed in one area and built this meta population and built this tower. So, the brother J. Key says, what about the scripture in Ezra which refers to the 10.5 parts passing, meaning 10,500 years of time, as of Ezra's scribes? I don't get the reference. I will have to look into the scripture. Just post the scripture and I'll try to find it and look into it. I definitely don't think the flood happened 4,400 years ago. And as I was saying, if you're saying that the Tower of Babel happened in the time and life of Noah, Noah would be the chieftain. He would be the head honcho. And then you're putting that wickedness on him. No, the Tower of Babel happened long after Noah passed. He was gone. Nimrod had built several cities during this time. This is letting you know that there's a huge population during this time. And it's not just Ham, Shem, Japheth, and their few children. It's letting you know time, a dispensation of time has passed, and we're talking about maybe 1,000, 2,000 years after Noah that this stuff started kicking off. And then you're starting to see the spread of agriculture, what we have also covered on this channel with the Neolithic Revolution, happened around 10,000 years ago. 10 to 12, they say, right? And we always credit that to who? Shem, because we find the genetic markers. That happened. That's way before that. So we're saying the flood had to happen before 10 or 12, somewhere around there. 1,000 years ago, the flood would happen then, not 4,400 years ago, when we can see that we were in the middle of the Bronze Age during the time of Abraham. Egypt was already established. Mesopotamia was already established. There was plenty of civilizations along the way. The Levant corridor, we can see the trade going back and forth from Egypt to the Levant. We can see these different places being built up. The Hittites. We can see these people. Everybody was established during this time. You can clearly see that they didn't get off the boat 400 years ago, um, referencing to the ark. You can clearly see they had a lot more time to establish themselves here on the earth, which is a big hole, and puts a big hole in the 6,000 year theory. Just as studying archaeology, um, this brother, I don't know who this is, but he said all archaeologists and historians calculated back to 6,000 BC. All the millions of years claim is deception. I don't even believe in millions of years, and all archaeologists and historians do not calculate 4,000, 6,000. That's not true. A lot of archaeologists attest to Eridu being around 7,000 years ago. Royal Prince says the process was fast. I mean, how fast? You're saying if we go according to the biblical narrative and we take it literal, in Genesis 10, how many children did Ham, Shem, and Japheth have? That would be your generation there. That would be the generation that you would have to say built the Tower of Babel. That's not a city. That's not a meta population. During the Tower of Babel, there were several cities that Nimrod ran, and it was enough people to actually build and construct what's the word? A highly technical tower. This wasn't mud brick. This is regular mud bricks. This wasn't a dung hut. This was a tower that needed to be built and constructed, and needed people to first invent that technology, power technology, and then you need the manpower to actually go with the construction. You're saying only the few children of Ham, Shem, and Japheth were there? No. This obviously did not happen in their time. It obviously didn't have nothing to do with Noah. Noah was gone by this time, because Noah would have been a head chieftain, because he would have been the elder. He would have been the oldest person on the planet and oversaw that. So some time went by. You know what I'm saying? That's what we're going to get into when I start reading the material. You understand? Yeah, Jay Keys, if you can find that scripture for me, I'll look at it and examine it. But yeah, man, the earth, I'm not saying the earth is millions of years. So whoever on Facebook saying all that millions of years claim, I don't say the earth is millions of years. I know that the magnetic field of the earth, it has a rate that it loses its power every year. And if you go back in time 100,000 years, the magnetic field will be so strong it'll rip the damn blood out. It'll rip the iron out your blood. No life will be able to be here. So I understand that the earth's not millions of years and these astronomical numbers, but I also know that the earth not 6,000 years old either. It just can't be. You got Eridu, you got Mesopotamia, you got the Neolithic Revolution. We have tons of evidence in the Neolithic Revolution. We talk about the Natufians. That's 8,000, years ago. 8, 9, 10,000 years ago. This is the period of civilization in the earth, and the people on the earth reestablishing themselves after a dramatic event. What is that dramatic event? If you follow the biblical narrative, that will be the global flood, or worldwide flood, depending on who you ask. But I know it was a global flood because if you check the stratum, which is just underneath the earth, you have sedentary rock, a layer of sedentary rock everywhere that contains dead things all over the earth. What is sedentary rock? Water and dirt, mud. So you have that all over the earth. That lets you know that a flood buried these animals in dirt, created mud, and then fossilized these animals. We can see that evidence. When did that happen? We can see that as well. When we start seeing, this is why you have this period of where people are hunter-gatherers and going into civilization. That's us as humanity reestablishing ourselves and repopulating the earth. He says, after the people spread from the towers, when we see writing, how old is we start seeing, well, maybe, yeah, because writing didn't come along to what? What's the earliest evidence of writing? Probably 4,000 BCE. I'm not looking at any sources. I'm just trying to go off off of memory. So yeah, the evidence of it, it didn't come until much later, from what we can prove. So, but we do know agriculture, stuff of that nature, was around during the Neolithic Revolution, and that's when we start seeing through our ancestors. We take credit for that haplogroup E all day. We talk about that and glorify our ancestors every chance we can get on here. They brought that in. They brought in permanent dwellings. They took humanity during this time from a hunter-gatherer status into civilization status, agrarian society status through that process. And that's the time where we can say, okay, this was after the earth was devastated. You understand? And that may also explain why we don't see Neanderthals and Denisovans. They all died out in the flood. Those are echoes and remnants of the world that was here prior to Noah's flood. You understand? So, and that would explain the huge graveyards of fossils that we have underneath the ground that we excavate and we find. We find dinosaurs with soft tissue in it. Like, that this didn't happen millions of years ago. This was much more recent. These animals were living much more recent in time. I just don't believe this happened 4,400 years ago. Okay, brother said, J. Key says, second Ezra 14:11. Let me look at it. See if I can pull it up on the computer. Yeah, the Grand Canyon is proof that the flood happened. That's a spillway that a bank probably overflowed and just destroyed that, and it could have been a matter of minutes that Grand Canyon was formed. They try to say millions and millions of years. It doesn't make any sense. You understand? Let me look this scripture up real quick to see what this brother talking about. Second Ezra 14:11. Bringing it up real quick. Brother said 10 parts equal 10,000 years. I may have heard that before when I was a part of the Purple Gang a couple years ago. Let me see if I ran into this before. All right. For the world is divided. Oh, yeah, I remember this. For the world is divided into 12 parts, and 10 parts of it is already gone in half of a 10th part. So people will say that's 10,500 years. Sacrifice. You subtract 6,000 years of creation, and that gets you 4,000 more years. That's if you're saying each part represents 1,000 years. I don't necessarily agree with that. Because then that will put you back with 6,000 years. Some people say a day is 1,000 years, so 6 days equal 1,000 years each. I mean, each day of creation equals 1,000 years each, which doesn't make any sense if the days are normal 24-hour days. So I don't know. I don't see it like that, man. That's all I can say. I don't see that each part is 1,000 years. All right, man. Let me play this quick video by Hugh Ross. And I'll break down some things. Again, I don't agree with everything he states here, but I do agree with his points about the time after the flood, the establishing and reestablishing of people on Earth, as far as agriculture, civilization, the spread of people on Earth. We had different land bridges, how people got to Australia and stuff like that. I agree with that. You did have land bridges because this was an effect after the flood, after most of the water subsided, sea levels would drop, some of the water was frozen from different environmental effects because it started a cooling event. The sea level will be dropped in areas. Australia, between Asia and Australia, that would have been a land bridge. Explain how people got there. But this video is not about those specifics. Maybe in the future we'll cover that. But let me play this Hugh Ross video real quick for you guys. I believe this one is it right here. It's called Calibrating the Genesis Genealogies. And then I'm going to read an actual article from Dr. Hugh Ross going into this information. Let me share my screen. Appreciate everybody coming out and watching this Sunday evening. All right, here we go.
And systematic theologians. And what I notice is there's a consensus amongst these theologians that there are gaps in the genealogies.
So he's going to deal with the gaps of the genealogies. He's going to deal with the gaps, I believe, in Genesis 5, Genesis 6. Again, I don't care too much about that because that's ancient time, a world that was destroyed, that, included the Denisovans, included the Neanderthals. I really want to focus more on the time after the flood, after the destruction, and the reestablishing of human populations on the earth.
Even the young earth creationist theologians concede that there must be gaps in the genealogies. The big debate is how many. Young earth creationists argue there's only a few gaps. Some old earth creationists argue for a lot. Well, one of the things we tried to do is to settle this debate over how many gaps by trying to calibrate the one genealogy in the Bible where I think you can do that, and that's Genesis 11. And that's the genealogy that takes you from Noah down to Abraham. Well, we have a good historical date for Abraham. You can get a historical date by looking at the biblical chronology, but today we have the archaeological evidence to independently establish an historical date for Abraham. Abraham's name now shows up in a number of archaeological finds. In either case, you come up with a date that he was on the planet about 4,000 years ago. So he would have been in an active state at that time.
See, he would have been 4,000 years ago. That would have been a Middle Bronze Age period, right? That's when he came about. And Ur Chaldees, we have the records of Ur Chaldees, or Ur, more specifically, for those who say that's anachronistic. We have the records of when Ur was established, and it was established back. And then we have the Ebla tablets that go back to 2,400 years. So that how are you going to have the Ebla civilization living during the time of the flood, full of people and names and records and school for writing and language and everything established right after the flood or right during the time of the flood? The flood couldn't have happened 4,400 years. That's another point. 4,400 years ago. Couldn't have happened 2,400 BCE. It's not enough time. You're not allowing enough time for population to grow, to establish itself, to get civilizations, invent technology. You're not giving enough time. The time window is too small to say that. Like the Ebla tablets, like I said about Egypt, the establishments of pyramids. We see the pyramids being built. I mean, there has to be a workforce. There has to be a population there that's sedentary in the way they live, and armies. Weaponry has to already be established. Like you guys have to look at that logically. You understand? So we know Abraham comes much later than his progenitors. But if you read it literally, you will like, well, okay, he's only 3 or 4 generations after his progenitors. That don't make any sense. J. Key says, let's say Abraham's older than 2000 BC, more like 3000 BCE or so. I have to see the evidence on that. I'm open to it. We dealing with ancient history. 96% of history is in the dark. It's a mystery to us. Because most things in history, things are rolled over time. We lose information over time. Cities get destroyed, stuff gets buried, get lost to time. So we try to make these systematic models to try to reconstruct the past, and we look through a glass darkly, like we see in the Bible. But we got to be as logically consistent as possible. All right.
But as you read down the genealogy, you notice that halfway down the genealogy, exactly halfway down, you have this gentleman named Peleg. Now, if you go back one chapter, Genesis 10, verse 25, it tells us that the world was divided in the days of Peleg. And there's been quite a bit of discussion over exactly what that text means. But I think today we have the scientific insight to appreciate what that verse is really all about. In the sense that we notice in the beginning of Genesis 11 that God is emphasizing once again the need for humanity to become globally occupying the planet. In fact, what we notice in the first 9 chapters of Genesis is that God is repeating the command he gave in Genesis 1 in the beginning of Genesis 9. Now, he says to Noah, I want you and your descendants to multiply and fill the earth. When we come to Genesis 11, the human species is still resolutely disobeying that command. Let us build a city and a tower so we can remain as one people, one place, and not be scattered over the face of the earth. But God supernaturally intervenes and scatters humanity forcibly over the whole face of the earth. But there's one thing blocking that forcible migration, and that's the fact that the Bering Land Bridge is cold. While we have new evidence that demonstrates that the Bering Land Bridge warmed up just before it broke. And so there's a narrow window of time, less than 3,000 years wide, where we've got a bridge joining Siberia with Alaska. And the bridge is about 500 miles wide, so it's not a narrow bridge, it's a big wide bridge. But until 14,000 years ago, it was much too cold for easy human migration. But starting 14,000 years ago, the ice age was now well receded, and that whole Bering Land Bridge warmed up. In fact, it was considerably warmer than it is today, average temperature of 56 degrees. And scientists recently, 2 years ago, recovered food grains all across the Bering Land Bridge and were able to carbon-14 date those grains. And they come in at about 12 to 13,000 years ago. And also, we can document all along the coast of British Columbia, where you got all those islands and the mainland, and all down through Alaska and the Bering Land Bridge, you can document the rise of sea level. And what these oceanographers have been able to demonstrate is that sea level all along that coastline rose 500 feet, and rose over the course of only a few centuries. And that has now been carbon-14 dated as about 12,000 years ago. 11,000 years ago. So 11,000 years ago, we have an accurate scientific date for when the Bering Land Bridge was broken, and we now have the Bering Strait, and the Bering Strait was impassable literally for more than 10,000 years. In fact, there's the Queen Charlotte Islands off of British Columbia, a rather large set of islands inhabited by the Haiti Indians. And those Indians were cut off for 10,500 years because there was this Hecate Strait, which no boat could traverse. And likewise, the Bering Land Bridge was so treacherous that no boat could traverse it. And actually, I think that was part of God's plan. That meant that the human beings that had migrated over the Bering Land Bridge and moved into North America couldn't come back. So it prevented the human species from repeating the mistakes of the pre-flood peoples. And I don't know if any of you here are from Australia, but there was nice land bridges joining the Australian continent with southern Asia, or at least to such a degree that you could see land across the other side and take a boat over. And likewise, there was a bridge joining France and Britain at that time. And so there was all these pathways were all put into place for humanity to become globally occupied. And to make sure that humanity stayed globally occupied, these bridges were broken. And then we had these treacherous straits that would prevent people from coming back to one place one time. Well, if you have Peleg living 11,000 years ago, and you've got Abraham living 4,000 years ago, and if the lifespans recorded in Genesis 11 are proportional to the passage of time. Now, I admit that's debatable. But it's also a reasonable assumption to make. If that assumption holds up, you get a date for Noah that comes in around 30 to 35,000 years ago, and you get a date for Adam and Eve that comes in at about 50,000 years ago. But as you see here, I'm trying to be rather generous with the error bars. I think it's more like 50,000 plus or minus 10, but I'm willing to make it as big as 50,000 plus or minus 20, simply because we got that assumption about the passage of time. That may not be correct, but it's all we got to go with.
All right, so he basically used the land bridges, and when they appear, and he dated that about what 9 to 11,000 years ago, which would give it a gap from the time of Abraham to the time of Peleg, when the earth divided, right? Well, humanity divided. That would give 4,000, 11,000, about 7,000 year gap according to those numbers. Most people that read the Bible, they look at, okay, well, Peleg went right into the time of Abraham. You're giving us you're giving yourself less than 400 years of time if you're saying the time of Peleg was right after that you get Abraham. You understand? It was succeeded right by Abraham. That don't make any sense. Again, like if you're looking at the establishment of civilization, establishment as we've been bringing up Egypt, pre-dynastic Egypt goes well before 3000 BCE. Watch, I'm gonna show you something. Let me stop this so you guys can get an idea of timelines. Here, this is the Zondervan Handbook of Biblical Archaeology, and it goes into the early bronze, right? So the early bronze period is circa 3300 2950 BCE. So this is almost more than 5,000 years ago. You see what I'm saying? And you already have the early dynastic period in Egypt, right? So you're starting to see the first early dynastic or first dynastic pharaohs arise in Egypt. And you see urbanization, you see city states, you see cuneiform, you see writing and hieroglyphic writing during this time. If we was to believe that the earth was 6,000 years ago, you had to put the flood 4,400 years ago, put around 2,400 BCE. That how do you explain this? That's my question. How do you explain early dynastic Egypt? All right. And then you got the period of the patriarchs is around 2275 to 2000 BC. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is around 2067 BC at the end of the early bronze third period. We see nomadic lifestyles and transit culture during that time. That's what I'm saying. It's not with 6,000-year-old earth and a flood happening 4,400 years ago. There's not enough time to explain all of this. But if you have that gap that Dr. Hugh Ross just explained, the time of Peleg being around 11,000 years ago and Abraham being around 4,000 years ago, that will give you enough time to fit in early dynastic Egypt, pre-dynastic Egypt, Eridu in Mesopotamia. It would give you enough time for that. It'd give you enough time for the Neolithic Revolution, agriculture being introduced into the world, and the early civilization beginning to be introduced into the world as well. But if you take all that away and you say, okay, the flood happened 4,400 years ago, you ain't going to explain this. Look, early Bronze 2 period, you got around 2950 to 2700 BC. We have Canaanite settlements and worship centers. So you can see how that mode of thinking is very, very problematic. Early Bronze 3 period, 2700 to 2176 BC, the beginning of Egyptian Old Kingdom. And if you know anything about Egypt, it's well studied. We have a lot of archaeological digs and findings that pretty much put the nail in the coffin on this 6,000 year thing. Because we know when the Egyptian Old Kingdom ran, we know that there was trade going on. We know that there was a meta population there. People living sedentary lifestyles. We know that. We can see that they had hieroglyphics and records. Okay, the Maxim Ptah-hotep, one of the oldest books in the world, right, dates to this period. So we got writings. We understand that this is what was going on. Again, that you got to give enough time in your time scale to explain all this. And this goes back to being logically consistent. Check this out. Early Bronze, 4th period, 2176 to 1973 BC. Population decreased, cities destroyed in Canaan, end of the Egyptian kingdom. You know what I'm saying? This is when Abraham would come in around this time, right here, the period of the patriarchs, 2275 to 2000 BC. When Abraham came along, Egypt was established. Egypt had a large population. It had a workforce. It had monuments. It had structures. Where he came from, Mesopotamia was established. It had structures. It had a workforce. It had a society. It had civilization. This was around 227.5 to 2000 BC. So if you're saying a flood happened in 2400 BC, then you're saying only 100 years. It took 100 years to establish all of this. No, it don't work. It doesn't work at all. And that's my gripe behind that. You said it's too blurry. Let me see. Is that better right there? Can you see it? My bad. I try to blow these things up big enough for everybody to see it. Hopefully you can see it right there. Maybe take a screenshot of this page 54 to 55 in the Zondervan Handbook of Biblical Archaeology. A book-by-book guide to archaeological discoveries related to the Bible. You understand? And if you go pre-dynastic, you're going beyond 3000 BC. And like I said, if you're going to Eridu, you're going to 5200 BC. That's 7,000 years ago. That eclipsed that 4,400,000 years ago thing about the flood. All right, so there's a lot of holes in that. All right, then again, the time of the patriarchs, 1700 BC. It gives you Hoffman's dating and kitchen dating of the Egyptian sojourn, calculated 1876 to 1446 BC. That's how long we was in Egypt. So we're going to get into those genealogical gaps as well. We see that as a repeated theme in the Bible. We see it in the book of Exodus. We know for a fact that Moses do not descend from the third son of Levi. We know for a fact because they was in Egypt 400 years. Those children would have died out.
Yo,
what's going on? So those children would have died out and no longer been there. So we see those genealogical gaps, and that would explain how you got a pre-dynastic Egypt, how you got early Mesopotamian culture, Eridu, the city of Eridu, the Neolithic Revolution, the Natufians being there 8,000 years ago, being in the Levant and having a heavy presence there until the Bronze Age. That explains it. All of this happened after the flood. Punching more holes in the theory that the Earth's 6,000 years old and 4,400 year old flood. Like I said, I used to be a proponent of this. I used to fight for this all the time, but the more evidence I seen, didn't conform with it. So, hey, I'm gonna move with the evidence. Again, I try to be as evidentiary with my hypothesis and the way I move here on this channel as I can be. Logically consistent as I can be. Again, like I stated before, history, 96% of it is lost to time. It's in darkness. Some things we will just not know. But there's no excuse to be logically inconsistent. All right, so we're going to get to the next video here by Dr. Hugh Ross. I wanted to give you that quick one real quick so you can see where I was going with this video. Let's see. Check this one out.
The genealogy in Genesis 11 goes from Noah down to Abraham. 10 names. We also notice Genesis 5 has 10 names. And we spent some time in the class explaining why, as you read it in the original Hebrew, these are not complete genealogies, they're adequate genealogies. So the question is determining which names are dropped, how many generations are in between the ones that are mentioned. All biblical genealogies give you the, quote, the heroes in the genealogy that are selected to communicate a particular theological message. I won't get into the details of what's going on in Genesis 5 and 11, other than to point out it ends in Abraham, Genesis 11, and there's no dispute, biblically or extra-biblically, when Abraham lived. His name shows up in both the Akkadian and the Sumerian tablets, as well as in the Bible, and it puts his life roughly 4,000 years ago. And the error bar on that is as small as 50 years. So that's a fairly accurate date. The other date that we can get a good handle on is the fifth name mentioned in the genealogy is Peleg. And it tells us in Genesis 10:25 that the world was divided in the days of Peleg. And the most reasonable interpretation of that, in my opinion, is referring to the breaking of the great land bridges. The bridge that joined Britain to France, the bridge that joined Siberia to Alaska, and other bridges that we see around the world, especially the one that joined the Queen Charlotte's to the British Columbia mainland. Those all can be dated quite accurately with carbon-14, putting that at about 11,500 years ago. And I won't repeat it, but we showed maps of how Alaska and Siberia were joined together by a land bridge that was literally 500 miles wide. That was 40,000 years ago. But you go from 40,000 up to about 12,000 years, you see that that bridge breaks and there's a narrow strait. Then the strait becomes sufficiently wide that it's no longer possible for humans at that time to cross from Siberia into North America. Now, if the dividing of the world in the days of Peleg is a reference to the breaking of the great land bridges that took place at the close of the last ice age, that means we've got two dates that we can use to calibrate the Genesis 5 and 11 genealogies. You got the Peleg date, you got the Abraham date, and if the lifespans recorded in the text are proportional to the passage of time, that roughly puts the time of Noah and the flood at 40,000 years ago and Adam and Eve at 60,000 years ago.
Right. So I don't really agree with him with the 40,000 year ago thing, but what I do agree with him with is the 11,000 years ago of the time of Peleg, because again, all of the findings pretty much line up with that. Civilization coming in, Neolithic revolution, people spreading and dispersing out of Mesopotamia, pre-dynastic Egypt being established, being built. Like I said, Mesopotamia being built, people spreading into Europe and Northern Africa, right? We talk about the Ibero-Maurusian population. I believe this was during that time, and after that time, would have to be if the biblical narrative is true. If devastation hit the earth, global devastation hit the earth, global destruction hit the earth via the flood, and then people had to rebuild and restart, you would start seeing these people spread and go into these different groups after what we would call the Tower of Babel. And after this period, then you will see people spread into various places into the earth, establishing Egypt, establishing early Europe, Neolithic Europe, so on and so forth. What's going on, CEO? What you trying to say?
What roundabout number do you have for the Tower of Babel and the spreading of the people?
I would have to say, like I agree with Dr. Hugh Ross, it would have to be after 11,000 years ago. So somewhere around there, that'd be the time of Peleg, according to his findings. So that would explain why we see civilization of people coming from hunter-gatherers into civilization, when we talk about with the Natufians popping up and dominating the Levant and introducing the world to farming. We see that around that time. You understand? And that allowed people to start moving. We see people moving into Europe. We see people moving into Asia. We see people moving into North Africa, moving into Egypt, early Egypt. We start seeing that during that period. So putting two and two together, that's how I came to that conclusion. and establishing that.
Yeah, man, because it's always been a major conflict with science in the Bible on the 6,000 year period. Um, I appreciate the work you're doing right now because it's hard because when you're looking at science, they say some say that the Earth is 100 million years old. Uh, you know, is 90 million years old, and you know some brothers try to break down the time that it took to formulate the Earth. How long was that? And then you have Adam and Eve come on the scene. You know, how long ago was that? And then you have the flood 4,400 years ago. Um, you familiar with man, what's the guy's name? Uh, to be dealing with the dinosaurs, man. I can't think of the guy's name, man.
Who, Ken Hovind?
Yeah. So Ken Hovind is one of the people that I seen heavily pushing the 6,000 year theory.
Yeah, man. I like pretty much grew up on Ken Hovind. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Um, you know what I'm saying? Before I was an Israelite, so I'm familiar with his teachings. I agree with some things he say, but come on, man. Flood happened 4,400 years ago. That don't make no sense from a chronological standpoint. Let's go 4,400 years ago and see what was happening. 4,400 years ago, 2400 BCE, you would already have writing. You would already have civilization. You would already have Egypt being established. We got the Eblite tablets showing that people were living in Mesopotamia. A vast amount of people. We had schools being established in these areas. Why is that a problem? If the flood happened in 2400 BCE and we seeing civilization already being established, that don't make any sense. After the flood, there should be no civilization. There should not be any writing. There should not be any pyramids built. There should not be no labor force, no nothing. Right after the flood, you should have Ham, Shem, and Japheth and Noah trying and they wives and they children trying to start the earth population over again.
right.
You see what I'm saying? When you throw that 4,400 year stamp on it, it causes too many problems from a chronological standpoint. You know, we know Abraham. We got Abraham's history and story in the book of Genesis. During his time, Egypt was established. We know this because he went there. They had a pharaoh. They had a king. They had servants. They had a workforce. You understand? They had a trade system set up that was silver. They talk about the silver that they used to gain commodities. Come on now. You saying that
Yeah,
happened over a 50-year span? That all them people popped up in 50 years? That's the problem I got with it.
yeah. I mean, it would make it very difficult. It would make it very difficult for us to see civilization that soon. Uh, I mean, it would have to take time. Um, I have a book on ancient Sumer where it talks about the development of Sumer, and it talks about the ancient land of Akkad, and it goes into the difficulties that they had um, cultivating the land based upon the swamp region and the land not being as solid, being as close as it was to the Euphrates River, where Sumer uh, was developed. And so, what was the resources coming from for that development? Because if you go and you start to try to populate that area, and the land cannot sustain uh, the development of buildings, right? Like the land can't hold the pressure or the weight of a structure being built on it based upon the swamp nature of the land in the region. In order for that to start to populate, those people had to be fed, and those resources had to come from somewhere, right?
That's true. That's true. That's a
So that
great
means that
point.
it had to be it had to be people with with a similitude of civilization based upon um, livestock and also crops, right? In order for these people to be sustained to even move to that region, it tells you in Genesis 11 um, that they left and went to a land to make a name for themselves. And when we don't take in consideration the pockets of the Bible, and you just take it as literal, one son to the next, I think that was profound that you brought that out, that there were certain generations or names that was omitted, which gives a pocket of time that would actually help us understand the development of populations. So
Right.
it's kind of difficult for me to be able to try to wrap my head around that, because I need the data. I need the information to be able to to be able to quantify the understanding of these things, because I just haven't ran across the data, man. So what you bringing out is helping bridge the gap between the biblical narrative and the historical writings that a lot of brothers are not privy to.
Yeah. Yeah. I also brought up this, Jeremiah. If you're saying that this happened less than 300 years, because we know for a fact Abraham lived around 4,000 years from now. We know. So that's giving us a timestamp. 4,000 years ago, around 2000 BC, and then after that, we see the establishment of Jacob, Yaqub, or whatever you want to call him. Right? See him. We see his children. We see them going into Egypt. We know that they got out of Egypt around the 15th century. That give you around what 15 to 400 BCE. So we got a time frame on it. If you're
Yeah, because
saying that,
Abraham was born into a thriving civilization, like with kings and servants and
yeah,
land mass and all that. You can read some of those things about, for those who are into the external books, in the book of Jasher. So he was born into a place that already had kingships and servants and palaces and all that already 4,000 years ago. That's tough.
right. That's what I'm saying. Like you gonna squeeze that less than 400 years? Because remember the flood got to happen 2400 BCE. Abraham
Right.
come along 2000 BCE. You know what I'm saying? And then this would mean during the time of Abraham, or a little before it, Noah would still be alive. We go according to how long he lived. So you mean to tell me Noah was in on the Tower of Babel? He was in on it, huh? Because he would have been the elder. He would have been the oldest human being on the earth. He would have been the elder. He would have been the chieftain. He would have been over everything. He was in on the Tower of Babel with Nimrod. Come on, man. It don't make any
Well,
sense.
are you saying, are you asserting that Noah wasn't alive during the Tower of Babel?
I'm asserting that he was not alive during the Tower of Babel because from a what's the word I'm looking for? From a standpoint that how is anybody else overseeing him and his children? And if he was alive during that time, then he had to be like out of power or so old and decrepit he couldn't do anything. That's the only two options I got in my mind. You know, maybe someone can help me understand that better.
Yeah, well, I did a study on this, man. On it's on Yah World 777, called The Rise of Abraham. And so, just based upon the source, the book of Jasher, it talks about, even from with the what was said, because it says in Genesis 11 that they left a land and went and created something in the land of Shinar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that they
Mm-hmm.
left the rulership and authority of Noah, and Shem decided not to go. So Shem didn't leave and Noah didn't leave. But the children of Shem got swept up in that. And the way that I know this is because Terah, being the father of Abraham, resided as a high-ranking member in the court of Nimrod, according to the biblical narrative. And when Abraham was born, there was prophecies and a certain sects of the Magi who told Nimrod about a prophecy, foretelling a prophecy concerning a child being born that would overthrow the government. And when Terah's son was born, Nimrod called for Terah to bring his son so he can kill him. It was a whole big thing around it. It was intellectual warfare, for a lack of a better term, between Nimrod and Terah, on Nimrod justifying the command to be able to kill Terah's son. So ultimately, Terah yielded to the king, and he brought a baby to the king, but it wasn't Abraham. It was a child, one of his servants. And what he ended up doing was placing placing Abraham in a cave for 10 years and sending servants, and they was feeding him or whatnot. After that 10-year period, he sent Abraham back to Noah and Shem, and they taught him the ways of the Lord. And this is what brought about a 40-year period where Abraham comes back to his father Terah, and he goes on this spiritual journey concerning proving the creator versus the idolatry that Terah was dealing with. And they had the whole scene where Abraham challenged the idols and destroyed the idols in his father's house, and leading up to Abraham being thrown in a fiery furnace. Now, you can find this information in the book of Jasher. So I'm just saying that there is a writing that literally says that Noah was alive and Shem was alive, but they were not a part of the Tower of Babel, based upon they did not travel with Nimrod, being the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, who moved on to a further country to make a name for themselves. So they end up staying in the region, and this is how the land of Canaan end up falling into the hands of Canaan, based upon their servitude to Shem, and then the children of Shem going into idolatry. But that's something that we can look at, you understand, to find some validation and see if there's any other historical sources that we can validate some of this information. But this is the story that is being told in the book of Jasher, that Noah was alive, but he did not partake in the idolatrous worships and the development of the Tower of Babel. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts on that is, I don't know how Noah could be alive, because when he got off the flood, when did the flood happen? Noah lived to be what, 350, right? 350 years. I think that's what it is. No, he lived 350 years after the flood, right? The Tower of Babel would have came when? 101 years after the flood.
Because you had the generations of Noah, you had the generations of Cush, right? And then Nimrod was born from Cush.
Right. But that's what I'm explaining with genealogical gaps. Now, I don't dispute that. Maybe that did happen. I just dispute that Noah was there and was during his time. I think that's anachronistic, and this is why I say that, brother. So let's go with the genealogy. Noah has Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we go according to the Bible, I'm pulling up Genesis 10 right now. Let me share my stream. Stop that. Share this. Uh,
Yeah, so like you, man. I'm not trying to interrupt your flow either, man. But I want to understand, you know.
no, I'm glad you did. I like that. I like having conversation. Like I was telling the brother the other day that was very rude and very obnoxious. Wouldn't let nobody talk on here yesterday. That I like free flowing panels. You know what I'm saying? So if
Mm-hmm.
anybody want to oppose what I'm saying, they free to come on here. But you got to respect the panel, man. You got to let other brothers talk, get their thoughts out. You know what I'm saying? And that brother wasn't able to do it, Jeremiah. So he banned. He on the ban list. Yeah. But you
Oh
know, other than
wow.
that,
Oh, that-
yeah, the brother got banned, man.
damn.
I mean, when you tell somebody once or twice something, Jeremiah, and they
Yeah.
continue to do it, they letting you know they don't care. I don't care what you say, I'm gonna just do it.
Well, when
You
you
know,
when you when you open up your time to allow, you know, to allow someone to bring forth some information and they don't respect the platform, you know, I'm going to support what's right. You understand? We got to have order and discipline. The scripture says, "Do all things in decency and in order," man.
right, right. He came on here disrespecting Orthodox boy, and James texts me like, "Man, who is this?" You know what I'm saying? James was getting irritated. I'm like, "Bro, everybody's saying the same thing about you." Yeah, Hukanan, he just kept doing it. And I was like, "Nah, I'm not having that." Oh,
Are you
anyway,
talking about Daryl?
no, I'm talking about Alliance Forum, the Alliance Forum brother.
Oh man,
You know what I'm saying? Ain't been on here a whole week,
right.
and he showed his behind yesterday, man. But anyway, this Genesis 10 right here. So we got the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomar, Magog, Madai, and Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras, right? And then it gives you the sons of Gomar, Ashkenazi, Rephath, and Togarmar.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all the sons of Japheth. No. We got the sons of Javan here. Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodingnim, right? So if we look at this is how many generations? Gomar, Magog, Madai, and Javan, Tubal, and Meshach, and Tyrus. That would be one generation. Then Gomar would have children. That would be the second generation. The sons of Javan would be the same generation as Gomar, right? It was all born from Japhet. So we only seeing two generations of people being listed here. If we're reading it that way, right? Same
Mm-hmm.
thing with Ham. The sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Foot, and Canaan. Then the sons of Cush, they list them out. This will be the second generation, right? Well, actually, it has the sons of Ramah. That would be the third generation. So we got three generations of Ham here. Then Cush begot Nimrod. He began as a mighty one on the earth. So are we seeing within three generations from the time of Noah, we get Nimrod?
Mm.
It's not enough time. What I propose is this is a genealogical gap here. That's how I'm reading this. Maybe somebody in the comments will come here and say, you know, Yashu, you wrong. But you mean to tell me two generations pass, Tower of Babel, Nimrod comes, builds the Tower of Babel.
Yeah. Read 10 and 11.
Okay, let me get there. Okay, Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a
Mm-hmm.
mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it said, even Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. In the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech.
Oh, hold up, man. Hold up. Sidebar, real quick, man. A brother that will remain nameless tried to use this to say that Nimrod was following the Most High.
Who said? Oh man, I think I know who
you
said
know,
it.
you know
I
who
know.
said that, man.
Yeah,
Your favorite brother. That's right.
I know who you talking about now.
And he tried to say, well, yeah, see, Ham was the first one to follow the Lord. I was like, yo, man, that is not what that is saying, bro.
Man, he went against the Lord, man.
Right, right.
Come on, man. Also putting a timestamp on this, right? He started a wreck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uruk. We know Uruk or Erech. That go back to Eridu, man. I'm trying to pull it right. Yeah, that's right. What 5,000 years ago? I mean, 7,000 years ago. So that's why. Yeah. So again, Abraham lived 4,000 years ago. Eridu or Erech was around 7,000 years ago. So I don't know how we reconcile that. I don't know how to reconcile that. Maybe the story in the events that you read did happen, but maybe it was somebody that carried the title Nimrod. I don't see Noah being there, man. That's just from my research. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone could show me how I'm wrong. But that's just how I'm looking at it. Because look, if we read this passage, where is it at? Where we leave off at? Right here. Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. 10, in the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, which would be Uruk, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of the land went forth Asher, and builded Nineveh, in the city of Rehoboth, and Calah. So you mean to tell me he built the city, right? Which, because if you're reading it like he came right after Cush begot Nimrod, right?
Yeah, is this the first time we see cities being erected after the flood, right?
That's correct. But watch this. Cush is the direct son of Ham, 2nd generation. Nimrod will be the 3rd generation. So you mean to tell me the 3rd generation of people is only 3 major patriarchs in the family in the earth right now: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You mean to tell me out of these people, they were able to build a city? They were able to build a tower of Babel? Come on, man. There's not enough people.
Let me ask you this. Do you take in consideration the time that they were allotted to live, right? So we see 3 generations, but those 3 generations could span 500 years based upon the age of the people prior to the Most High, according to the biblical narrative, prior to the Most High cutting the age down on these people. Well, do that make a difference?
I mean, it could. That's the only way you would have to reconcile this. You would have to say Cush was 500 years. I don't even know how to make it. I can't even make it numerically sound right, man. I can't even do it, bro. I don't know how to do it.
Right? Because look, let's look at it, right? So let's say Ham, according to the Zondervan, was 96 years old during the time of the flood, right? Let's say another 100 years go by and he have Cush. He had other sons too, right? But Cush, I believe, was his oldest first son. So then because I don't see no listing of any son of Cush before Nimrod. But Nimrod still could have been a son 3 or 4 generations, 3 or 4 sons down within the age, because it don't say that. It just says, and Cush begot Nimrod.
Right.
But we don't know. You see what I'm saying?
What I'm thinking that's referencing is that's just saying he's a descendant of Cush.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's not really saying that Cush literally, you know what I'm saying? He came from the seed, the direct seed of Cush, you know what I'm saying? Right. As his father, his actual biological father, right then and there from the same generation. I believe this is talking about he's a descendant of Cush, and the Bible want to make note of that. That makes sense as far as time wise. You know what I'm saying?
in the book that I have, Sumer, it talks about the ancient land of Akkad, and it talks about, and you got to forgive me, man. It actually gave names in there. Some of those names were linked back to some of these biblical characters, and I'm gonna look at it real quick because they rose up. One man rose up out of um those cities that were made and created his own city, which they linked to Nimrod being a lower ranking member based upon he has progenitors such as Cush, which would be in the eyes of the people a higher ranking member in the family, correct?
Yeah.
So and he rose up and actually created, which Zion Lex did an excellent job of breaking down the language concerning Sumer and Shinar and actually linking them together. But you notice that Shinar was the last one that was mentioned, right? And so that means that you had the ancient land of Akkad, which was developed before that. And actually, the book I have here called the Samaritans. Not sure if you're familiar with this book, Samaritans by C. Leonard Willie. So in this book, it talks about and I should have been better prepared for this, man. But I'm gonna reference some of these things to try to see if we can line up some of these names. But it talked about the king of Samaria and the and Akkad, right? And all this was around the Tigris and the Euphrates River. And it talked about this man rising up, and it kind of corroborates with the biblical narrative showing that the ancient land of Sumer or the ancient land of Shinar was developed after Akkad. You see that right there in Genesis 10 right there, verse 10.
Yeah, it says in the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar.
Mm-hmm. So when we take in consideration some of these time gaps, I mean, what you're doing actually helps, Joshua, because damn, we locked in a 4,400 year paradigm, man. I mean, how do we get out of this, brother?
Yeah. And people may be offended by it. It's not to offend. I'm still saying this stuff happened.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Just at different time frames. It didn't happen all within 100 years after the flood or within 400 years after the flood. This stuff happened, like, again, Uruk and Eridu, that's like 5,000 or 7,000 years ago. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, because look, when it talks about the curse of Canaan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we get a breakdown, the reason that Canaan was cursed because he was the result of a certain sexual relations between Ham and Noah's wife. But we don't know if Noah's wife was actually Ham's mother. And if that's the case, if he took another wife, that means generations had to pass. We had to have children being born if that was the case, right? Yeah. If we're going with that narrative, that means that if Noah took another wife, the Bible doesn't say this, but we know that to see a man's nakedness is to sleep with his wife. We know that's factual. So was it a case of incest? Then you have brothers that look into it and say, well, it could have been possible that time elapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And if that time elapsed, we know that they were living longer lives at that time. And the reason they had to live those longer lives is so that the earth could be repopulated. So if the purpose is for the earth to be repopulated, there's a good chance that Noah took another wife. What's your thoughts?
I think it's very plausible. And I think the first time you had brought this up, I was like, I like it because it makes more sense for Canaan to get cursed You know what I'm saying? If he the product of that.
Right.
Like you said, it's not in the Bible. It's something that we're implying here, but you know, it's plausible. It could have happened that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because why would his son get cursed?
Right. Why wouldn't you curse Ham? You see? So I'm with you on what you're bringing out as far as this time lapse. It actually helps if we start looking at the biblical narrative and being able to get out of this, because the 400-year, and you correct me if I'm wrong, this 4,000, 4,400 or 4,200 years ago is based upon them simply seeing the names and going from one generation to the next. That's how they calculated that.
Yep.
Via Ken Hovind.
Yep. It just don't make okay. So let's assume that they right.
Mm-hmm.
The only people on the earth is the sons of Japheth. We see that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 people. That's Japheth. So then we go to sons of Ham.
Hey, and we know people are being omitted because it don't make no mention of the daughters that was born. So where's that at?
Right.
Like, come on, we have to look at that, man. So it's powerful what you're bringing out, because we know that there were daughters born, man. Why are they not being mentioned?
15, hold on, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28 with Nimrod. That's 28. And when you go to Shem, where's Shem at? Where's Shem? Right here. So we got 28 so far. Eber will be 29. Let me start here. So counting Shem would be 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. And then Peleg will be 41 and 42. And then Joktan's children will be 43, 44, 45, 46.
Hey man, that don't even fill up a damn block, man. Of people, man. What's going on, man?
That's what I'm trying to get people to see.
Right.
47, 48,
man,
49.
That's 2 breezeways in an apartment complex, man. Come on, man.
50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55. So we got 55 people, man. This is 55 total people during the time of Nimrod. We're assuming. If all this is in chronological order, boom, 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 right after each event happens, each generation. 55 people. They built a city. They built Erech. Why would you need all these cities? It's only 55 people here. You understand? Well, let's put in the women and stuff. So let's say it's 100 or 200 people. It's just 200 people. You need that many cities?
Right.
This is why you can't jumble all this up together and say this happened in succession. No, it didn't.
And that's how the so-called biblical timeline is developed. Family, we got to look at that, man. That's listen, they are literally taking these names and counting these people on how they come up to the timeline, man. I had a debate with the brother that will remain nameless, right? I debated him on the age of Shem during the time of Abraham. He told me that Shem, by the time Abraham was born, Shem would have been 2,000 years old. I said, bro, that's not true. You're miscalculating. You're miscalculating the number, right? So what he was doing was counting the age of each person and then adding that up. Instead of adding up the births, right, and subtracting that time from the actual age. So if it says this person lived to be 375 years old or 520 years old, and then he had one son, and then that was it. And then you start counting again. So the way they're, do you have any examples that you can show how they came up with the calculation of the biblical timeline?
Yeah, so it's all over the internet. You can look up the age. So they add all the ages up together so they can see this
Right.
person lived 400 years and this person lived. They add all those ages up together, pre-flood and after the flood. They say that would take us to 4,400 years ago. Noah's flood would be 4,400 years ago.
There
That's
you go. That's the problem, Joshua, right there. You right, man. That's powerful. Damn, that's crazy, man.
I'm saying, like when it says Cush begot Nimrod, that just is denoting that he's a descendant of Cush. And people will be like, oh, I don't believe that. Okay, let's go to the book of Exodus, where it says the same thing about Moses. Matter of fact, let me get that. Moses genealogy. That's Exodus 1, right?
Yeah. Bring it out.
We go to Exodus. Watch this. Here you go. We got the genealogy right here. It says, now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. So this will be the first generation Israelites right here.
Hey, let me say this too real quick. I believe that this timeline is different from what we get in Genesis. Why do you say that, Jeremiah? Because there are no time lapse based upon the story and the evidence that we have them actually coming into the land with a specific number of people. We do not have that in Genesis 10. Am I right or wrong about that?
No, we don't. We don't have that.
Right.
You're right. You're right about that. Genesis 10 and 11 is a bunch of history compacted into those two verses.
Right.
The rest of it, from the time of Abraham on, we get the history of Abraham and all the way to the formation of first generation Israel. We got their history. We see them going into their land, establishing themselves, what wives they got. We get a little of their backstory. We get a little backstory of Judah. We see Joseph going into Egypt, so on and so forth. You don't get that in Genesis 10 and 11. You get a brief description of what went on during these different times. We read this. All right, so we established the first generation of Israel came into Egypt, right? With their father, right? And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob was 70 souls. For Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren and all that generation. So we know all of the first generation of Israelites died off. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. This is a time lapse right here. In between the time they came into Egypt to the time that the Exodus narrative starts. When it says, now there arose up a new king over Egypt, time has passed since the first generation of Israelites.
Right, time lapse.
Yeah. So watch this. Now I want to get Moses' genealogy pointed out. Is this it right here? Moses answered. What chapter is that? Is it Exodus 3 or 2? Is it 2?
Yeah, it's 2.
With a man out of the house of Levi. Child grew up. No, it ain't this one. Where is it at? Where it talks about Amram. Let me look it up. Amram. And you know what's crazy about this? This is the point that that our brother was trying to make in that debate about the Exodus. Where is it at? Numbers 25, Exodus 6.
Yeah, And listen, it put us behind the 8 ball, man. If we don't do this research you're doing right here, man.
Amram took Jochebed's father, sister, wife. She born him Aaron and Moses. Life of Amram 100. Here it is right here, Exodus 6. Exodus 6. Let me view the chapter. No, I just got it right here. 6 and 17. The sons of Gershon. Now let me view the whole chapter so I can get the whole context. Right here. Verse 16. And these are the names of the sons of Levi according to their generation. Gershon and Kohath and Merari. In the years of the life of Levi were 137 years. This generation right here all died off by the time of the beginning of the Exodus narrative. We just read it. The sons of Gershon, Libni, Shimei, according to their families. And the sons of Kohath. Kohath is a part of what? Kohath is a part of that first generation of Israelites that came into Egypt. Right here, look. Kohath, Amram, and Issar, and Hebron, and Uziel. The years of the life of Kohath were 133 years. And the sons of Merari, Mahali, and Mushi. These are the families of Levi according to their generations. And Amram took Jochebed, his wife's sister, to his father's sister to wife, and she bare him Aaron and Moses. Wait a minute. Moses comes from Amram, and Amram comes from Kohath. This is not saying that Amram directly is the son of Kohath. He's a descendant of Kohath.
Right.
How do we know that? Kohath died in the beginning of the Exodus narrative. The Israelites was in Egypt for how long? Over 400 years. This is 400 years after Kohath and Amram died off. That's how, Kohath died off. That's how we know that this is not direct descendancy, meaning father to son. This is saying Amram descends from Kohath. Like if someone's from Issachar, I am a son of Issachar, right? If I said that, I'm not saying I directly, that's my father, my direct father, but I'm a descendant. I'm saying I'm a descendant. That's what's going on in the book of Exodus.
Right. Like when the scripture calls Christ the son of David.
There you go. That's another one. Yep.
Right.
That's another one. He's a descendant of David, not the direct son of David. He didn't live during the same time as David. So we see this same type of literary work in the book of Exodus as we saw in Genesis with Cush begatting Nimrod. And you got this, the sons of Kohath. The sons of Kohath, Amram. Amram is the father of Moses. They lived 400 something years after Kohath died. All right. So again, that's another genealogical gap that we see in the Bible, right? So I just wanted to point that out, man. I also want to go back to Genesis 10 or Genesis 11 to further illustrate this point. Show that this ain't going on 4,400 years ago, right? And you're right, Jeremiah. When you locked into that 4,400 years, you got it's a lot of stuff you got to explain. So Genesis, the 11th chapter. Now we was in Genesis 10. Genesis 10 with the Tower of Babel. Genesis 10, right here. And 10, in the beginning of his kingdom, referring to Nimrod, was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Now let's read about when these places were erected. When did these places come about? All right. So we're going to share the screen. Let's get this book open. This is the Zondervan Handbook of Biblical Archaeology again. J. Randolph Prince, page 84 and 85. Let me make sure y'all can see this. A brother said it was kind of fuzzy. I hope y'all can see that. I try to blow it up if y'all say y'all can't. So we go here, the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11:4-9. Says, then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. First of all, in order to build a city, you need a workforce. You need people to actually do it. You need people that have the knowledge and understanding to do these things.
Nah, brother, it only take 54 people, bro.
Yeah, 54 people took all their time out to do it. Didn't take care of their wives. Didn't do nothing else. They just focused on building this tower. It says, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered all over the face of the whole earth. That's what the Most High wanted them to do, is to fill the earth, right? It said that is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. The tower was constructed in the general vicinity of Shinar, Genesis 11:2, southern Mesopotamia, Babylonia, where the city of Babylon would later be founded. Van der Veen and Zerbs argue that Hebrew Shinar is derived from the Akkadian Sumer, such that the site may be equated with ancient Sumer. The Hebrew term used for the tower, verse 4, is Migdal, a term used elsewhere in the Old
Thank
Testament.
you. I appreciate you just quantifying the statement I made earlier about Sumer. Bring it out.
It says the Hebrew term used for tower is Migdal, a term used elsewhere in the Old Testament for a military tower. However, since the context is Mesopotamia, it was the most appropriate word in the Hebrew vocabulary to describe the ziggurat, a structure in Mesopotamian culture historically fitting the author's description. Even so, the Hebrew root gadal, to be large, is roughly the equivalent of the Akkadian word zakaru, to be high, used for the ziggurat. And in fact, the form of the ziggurat may be thought as a successful towers built one upon the other. Some 30 Mesopotamian ziggurats have been found from the north Mari, Tel Brak, Dir Shuriken, the south and Eridu, and the east Susa and Choga sandbills. Some claim the earliest structures that they may be called ziggurat are discovered at the Ubaid temple at Eridu in the Ubaid period. That's 4300 to 3500 BCE. This is when this stuff was going on. And at the Sumerian city of Uruk, biblical Erech. Remember I brought that out? The Erech, that's talking about the city of Uruk.
Yeah.
Dated to the Jamdet Nazar period, 3100 to 2900 BC. So again, this is before what? 4,400 years ago. But we know all of this happened after the flood. So how do you reconcile it? How does somebody reconcile this? All right. So I just need someone to explain these things. If we're gonna go with the 4,400 year theory on you know, the Tower of Babel happened right after flood, Abraham coming up, and all of that. I need some understanding. Maybe somebody out there. I put the link in there. Somebody can reconcile all these things. The population growth issue, the workforce you would need to make the Tower of Babel. How are you going to fill the earth with 55 people? Why do you have 4 or 5 cities that you're building and you only got 55 people? You know what I'm saying? Let me add 200. Let's say you get 1,000. It still don't make any sense. All right. So let me play Hugh Ross's video, and then we're gonna read some literature. All right. But anybody's welcome to come on and explain this. And we're gonna let you come on, get the mic. We ask you to be respectful and let other people talk. That's all. Where did that video go? I'm looking for it. And again, I don't agree with everything Dr. Hugh Ross states. You know what I'm saying? I don't believe in millions of years. I don't believe the that we evolved or any of that, monkeys, all that other crap. I don't believe in it, but this particular point right here, I mean, the evidence is immense. You know what I'm saying? There's so many things you got to calibrate and bring into consideration when we're discussing these genealogical gaps. Excuse me, I'm trying to find this video. Thought I had it queued up. Oh, right here.
So we're all descended from Adam and Eve, according to the Bible. But one of the things that I much appreciate about Carl is the way he emphasized bringing together all of God's revelation. One of his pet peeves was this whole idea that people will look at one book of the Bible. We really don't have that practice today of integrating the 66 books of the Bible. And I remember him complaining too about scientists, how they only look at one scientific discipline. And indeed, what we're going to be talking about today stems from the fact that we've got people debating whether or not the Bible is really can be trusted about what it says about Adam and Eve based on evidence from a single scientific discipline. And if you're going to come up with some kind of model where you're going to overturn a paradigm, you need to make sure that your model is consistent across all the scientific disciplines.
And that's what we try to do here at the source, try to make sure it's consistent across all of the scientific disciplines and fields, so we can make stronger arguments. Again, I'm not disagreeing that the Bible, the events in the Bible happened. I'm disagreeing with the time that people are saying they happened.
Disciplines and all the books of the Bible. Genesis is not the only book of the Bible that talks about Adam and Eve, for example. That's one of the things we're trying to do here in this class is pull together what the Bible says about human origins. I mean, it's true, we're focusing on Psalm 139, a psalm about God's creation and design of the human species. But there's much scripture which speaks about Adam and Eve, and we'll be getting into that. So anyways, I hope that's something that you all appreciate here, that this is a class where we try to integrate all of God's revelation, the book of nature and the book of scripture. God's given us two books. We're to read and study both. Again, I could quote Carl, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, the Bible commands you to be a theologian. You do not leave it up to the experts. It's not just the pastors and the theologians that are supposed to research and study the Bible. We all are, and we're to study all of it. And likewise, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, then you're commanded to be a scientist. Don't leave it up to professionals like me and Richard here to do the work of scientific research. We're all commanded to be scientists, to research and study God's book of nature, and not just one discipline, but all the disciplines that are out there. Well, let's dive into this. And there's three things that Genesis and the Psalms and the Romans says about Adam and Eve. Namely, that for 6 days God creates, but the last thing he does in his work of physical creation activity is to create Adam and Eve. And when he created Adam and Eve, that's when he began his day of rest. And so God's been in a state of rest, resting from his work of physical creation activity ever since he created Adam and Eve. Now, as I've mentioned before in this class, this really helps us understand why so much of the scientific community looking at nature says we don't see any evidence.
Hey, let me say something real quick, Joshua.
Go ahead.
This is another point of contention that brothers try to.
You cut out. Jeremiah. Yo. Can you hear me? Or am I out? Is my internet messing up? No, it ain't on me, is it? Yo, can you hear me? Or did he cut out?
In the earth, and you've been using it and it's heating up, you want to give it rest. So the earth need rest. How do I know that? The Bible talks about the 7-year rest period for the land. So we know, dealing with creation, it wasn't the Most High that needed rest, but his creation. I yield.
Excellent.
And it's because there's quite an imbalance in the scientific community. A lot of people I've run into think that there's equal numbers of astronomers and physicists and chemists and biologists, and that's simply not the case. There are a few mathematicians, a few astronomers, a few more physicists, a lot more chemists, and a whole lot more biologists. And so if you were to look at, for example, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, 95% of the membership are biologists. And you might say, wow, is that because only 95% of the scientists really like the AAAS? No, it simply reflects the demographics of the scientific community. So, for example, I'm an astronomer, but active research astronomers add up to about 10,000 worldwide. If you look at biologists, it's about 3.5 million worldwide. So biologists far outnumber astronomers. Okay, 3 things the Bible says about the origin of human beings. That when God created Adam and Eve, that's when he ceased his work of creation activity. And what I meant to add was this. The fact that God has ceased from his work of creation activity when he created Adam and Eve does not mean that he is doing nothing. He is simply ceasing from his creation, physical creation activity, and is focusing on other activities. And he refers to this as a Sabbath of rest.
Right, that's a good point.
Excuse me. It's similar to our Sabbath in that we cease from our employment, but we don't cease from other activities in our life. In fact, the whole idea of the Sabbath is we put aside our employment activities in order that we can focus on spiritual activities. It's so easy for us human beings to get so focused on our work that we ignore the most important components of our life, namely the fact that we're not only body and soul, we're also spiritual, and we need to spend time every week focusing on the spiritual. Well, likewise, God has put aside his physical creation activity, and he's targeting the spiritual in the sense that the 7th day is that day when God brings about the end of all evil, where he conquers and eliminates evil once and for all. And yes, there is a date coming when God will create again. And so God ceasing from creation activity is simply a temporary episode, just like our Sabbath is a temporary episode. It doesn't last forever. It lasts one day, and then we go back to work. Adam and Eve are the only spirit beings that God created on earth. It's not the only spirit beings he created. He also created angels. But we are the only spiritual beings that God created that are constrained to the physics of this universe. The angels are not constrained by the physics of this universe. They have a separate realm from ours. And unlike us, they can come into our realm and leave our realm under God's control. But we are constrained to the physics of this universe. So we're not like the angels where we can come and go. We are indeed constrained. But we're the only spiritual beings that God has created that are constrained to this universe. And the Bible teaches that Adam and Eve are the progenitors of all humans, which means we're all related, okay? We're all brothers and sisters because we can all trace our descent back to one couple, Adam and Eve. Now, the reason we're spending some time on this, these 3 doctrines are being seriously challenged by people doing research, particularly on human genomics. And there are people arguing for the first time in the history of the church that we have to abandon what the Bible teaches about the origin of human beings, either treat these passages in Romans and Genesis, for example, as figures of speech, or dealing with a completely different topic. And so, for example, there's been a number of books published in the past 5 years by Christian theologians making the point that we need to reinterpret the Bible and really look at these texts on Adam and Eve as texts that are not dealing with physical or natural history, but really have a different point altogether. Now, as an evangelist, I have a problem with that because whenever I put Genesis 1, for example, in front of a non-Christian who's never read the Bible before or has never been to church before and ask the question, take a look at this, is this talking about natural history or not? I've yet to meet such an individual who would say, no, it's not talking about natural history. The only people I meet who say that it's not talking about natural history are Christians concerned that they can't scientifically defend what the biblical text talks about. And mainly it's because they fail to follow the scientific method. And I like to tell theologians when I'm on seminary campuses that...
All right, so I'm going to go back to that. I want him to talk about the genealogies real quick. I'm going to show you this article real quick, kind of go over what we went through, Tower of Babel and not in Genesis 11. Excuse me. Then we can get back to that. Right here. Same guy, just going to his website and reading his material, Reasons to Believe. Says, does the Tower of Babel confirm genealogical gaps in Genesis 11 by Hugh Henry and Daniel Dyke? Says a common assumption is that Genesis 5 and 11 contain complete father to son genealogies without gaps, and therefore one can rely on these genealogies to accurately calculate the date of creation and Noah's flood. However, as we previously presented, strong evidence shows that genealogy gaps exist. In this article, we will present the additional evidence for genealogy gaps found in Genesis 11, 1-9, story of the Tower of Babel. Bishop Ussher and other no-gap proponents typically date this event at Babel 101 years after the flood, around the time of the birth of Peleg, assuming that Peleg is the fourth generation after Noah's sons. When we covered that, right? So only 100 years passed since the end of the flood and the Tower of Babel was erected. Not only was the Tower of Babel erected, they built several cities in Sumer, man. Says Noah was never an apostate. I touched on this earlier. Genesis 9:28 records that Noah lived 350 years after the flood, according to the cultural norms. Noah would have been the head of the clan who clustered in Babel 101 years after the flood. The only way that Noah could have approved building a tower to heaven against the will of God is for him to have rejected God. Yet this is not possible because the New Testament lauds Noah as a giant of faith. Hebrews 11:7, 2 Peter 2:5. Moreover, if for any reason Noah could not serve as the head of the clan, the job would have fallen to one of his sons, yet they too had witnessed the wrath of God and would surely be reluctant to undertake such a project against God's will. Yeah, that's the part I don't get. How could they be a part of something that they just seen the earth get destroyed by a flood, and then you're gonna, be defiant again? You're gonna be a part of the construction of the Tower of Babel in hopes to defy the Most High again? From a logic standpoint, that don't make any sense. Especially when you've seen one of the most horrific devastations ever in the history of mankind, with the destruction of the whole earth, the whole population of the earth being reduced to 8 people. So it says, in summary, it's spiritual and culturally impossible to claim that the Tower of Babel occurred when Noah and his sons were still alive. It must have occurred much later when someone else was patriarch of the clan. So that's an argument, right? Reason 2, the technology is too complex to develop in only 101 years. Genesis 11:3 states that they, the men of Babel, said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. This emphasized.
Hey, real quick.
Say what?
Let me say something real quick.
Oh, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, because you had said it's not likely that they would go against the Most High after seeing the one of the most horrific deaths in the history of mankind. I don't know about that, because the reason I'm saying that is because when we look at the actions and the behaviors, let's take King David for an example. We know that King David had a first class seat to the downfall of Saul. And then he turned around after going through all of that with Saul and ultimately seeing the demise of Saul, and then turned around and committed adultery and nearly lost his life as well. I don't think, according to the biblical narrative, we can give many examples of that, such as Peter being told, "You're gonna deny me," and then turn right around and denied him. So
That's true.
I don't think, you know what I'm saying? I don't think brothers seeing horrific things is actually a deterrent, an absolute deterrent. Now, some brothers might be like, "Yo, let me get it right," like we see with King
Josiah.
Josiah. Yeah, when he turned and he said, "You know what I'm saying? Hey, I seen what happened before me. We're gonna get it right." So there are examples where that actually worked. But when we look at Noah, and then we look at right after the flood, whatever the time gap is, we know that Ham rose up and did something that was off, right? And Cush was born. Cush was alive doing this. How do I know this? Because the end result of the act spawned a child by the name of Cain, which was the last son according to the biblical narrative, right? So I don't necessarily think just because they seen that it detoured them. I believe, and this just going off of what I've studied and researched, looking at that the sons rose up and moved away. Not only did they stop following the ways of the Most High, but they moved away from the actual land, from the watchful eye of their father. Shem did not. Shem actually stayed with his father. So as they moved away and got off from under the authority of their father, that's when they started to go into this wickedness, because the Bible doesn't say that they did that before. The Tower of Babel was not created until they moved away from their from Noah, based upon Genesis 11. What do you think?
That is possible, because we saw the Israelites pretty much the decimation of Egypt and the plagues, and we still defied the Most High in the wilderness. So I can give credence to that. I just don't. It's just so crazy because the magnitude of this, that was a lot of people getting killed, but we talking about everybody on the earth except y'all. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I would expect them to be timid, but I am open for that. That could be the case. They could have saw that and was like, "To hell with that. I don't care. It ain't me." You right.
Right. The children of Israel just saw the damn Red Sea opened up. You just seen the plagues of Egypt. You get in the wilderness and create a golden calf. These people got to be out of their mind, man. What's going on, bro?
Yeah. That is possible. Godly. Where was I at? All right, so right here. So the second point was about the technology. So they brought up the men of Babel. They was baking bricks, and they didn't use stone, and they used tar for mortar. It said this emphasizes that the Tower of Babel was not a simple mud brick structure like early Mesopotamian ziggurats. It was built of much stronger and more substantial fire brick. Making fire brick is a complex engineering endeavor. Clay soil must be mixed with a proper amount of sand and water and any binders and placed into molds. A kiln must be built so the bricks can be brought to 800 degrees Celsius. That's 1450 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 days or so to give them stone-like strength. An anecdotal indication of the complexity is found in the autobiography of brilliant Dr. Booker T. Washington, who set up a brick-making operation in the 1880s. I had always supposed that brickmaking was very simple, but I soon found out the bitter experience that it required skill and knowledge, particularly in the burning of the bricks. Washington's first 3 kilns were failures and temporarily bankrupted him. Yet this happened at a time when brickmaking was a mature art. By contrast, the people of Babel had to develop brickmaking by trial and error and without any apparent prior knowledge. The men of Babel used chamar or tar, or more accurately, bitumen, for mortar. Bitumen deposits were common in the Tigris Euphrates Valley, where Babel was located in Genesis 11 and 2. And archaeologists confirmed that bitumen was commonly used as mortar in early Mesopotamia. But a central question is, how did the men of Babel know that they needed mortar and the bitumen would work well for that purpose? Noah did not use chamar to seal the ark. See Genesis 6:14. The men of Babel probably had to learn this by trial and error. It is also obvious that a tower to heaven must be designed by experienced architects and the construction overseen by experienced structural and construction engineers. In other words, the Tower of Babel required complex engineering on a number of levels. How could these descendants of Noah acquire this knowledge and experience in only 3 generations? God served as Noah's chief engineer as he built the ark in Genesis 6:14-16, but the tower builders working against God's will did not have the benefit of God's direction to overcome the engineering obstacles. It seems inconceivable that all these technologies could acquire by trial and error in a mere 101 years after the flood. And I want to add to that, not only is they building the tower, they already built 6 cities. They built cities too. So it's like only 100 years after Noah, it just doesn't sit well with me. Reason 3 is the population is too small. A tower of heaven would require a large number of laborers to collect clay, sand, and binders, mold lots of bricks, load and unload kilns, transport the bricks to the building site, and to collect the bitumen and transport it to the site. Furthermore, the builders would require the support of an advanced society with agricultural surplus and the visions of labor efficient enough to provide food, shelter, clothing, and childcare for the community at large while diverting so many men to tower building. Could Noah's sons produce enough people in only 101 years? The patriarchs in Genesis 11 averaged 31.4 years to the first child, excluding those who had children at an unusually old age. Genesis 10, 2-3, 6 and 20, and 21-31 reveal Shem, Ham, and Japheth had an average of 4.6 sons each, and their sons averaged 5 sons each. An equal number of daughters might be assumed. Hence, basically, base population estimates can be made on 10 children per couple and 30 years to the first child. On this basis, the world population would be a mere 1,300 people, including only 436 males, 16 years of age or older, and 422 children under 16 years of age. About 101 years after the flood, it isn't plausible that so few people might undertake all that engineering and labor-intensive tasks outlined, or that such a society could have sufficient divisions of labor to support it. This conclusion, supported by a study of ancient cities that estimates a minimum of 10 to 100,000 people are required before a systemic division of labor might take firm hold. So you need about 10 to 100,000 people to have that type of labor force to build a tower, to build the cities that host the tower, and have all the technology, agriculture, agrarian society, the surplus for the people to survive, the food, clothing, shelter. You're not getting that in 100 years. You're not. Read on. It says Babel would be far below these numbers 101 years after the flood. Only in the 6th or 7th generation after Noah's sons, almost 200 years after the flood, would the city have this many people. Yet even though there may have been enough people by this time, it still seems unlikely that needed technology could be developed by then without God's direction. The Tower of Babel could not have occurred 101 years after the flood in the 4th generation after Noah's sons, as no gap proponents believe due to the following reasons. Noah would have had fall into apostasy, but he did not. The engineering technology would have been too complex to develop by trial and error in a short time period. There would have not been nearly enough people to undertake such a project. The tower had to occur many years later, meaning there must be gaps in Genesis 11 genealogies, whether or not the tower occurred around the time of Peleg's birth. All right. So those are some things to consider when we're talking about the time frame. You understand? Those are the things to consider. All right, I'm gonna play some more of the video. Then I got another article that I want to read regarding this. about the time frame again, because again, you can't say 101 years is enough. It just there's not enough evidence supporting it. Not enough people. The labor force is not there to build these cities, to build the Tower of Babel, and the population growth rate is not there with just three, starting off with just three people, and then within 100 years you want to have enough a population large enough to sustain a workforce, sustain 6 cities, sustain everything that we read in Genesis 11. Genesis 11 is a contraction. It's written in brevity. It's a lot of events. I mean, it's some events that took places in different epochs of time. All right, let's play the rest of that video.
We need to call this the physical testing method because the truth is the scientific method came straight from the pages of Scripture. And I wish that was taught more in the university system, because I run into a lot of scientists who have no idea where the scientific method came from. They don't even figure out it came out of Reformation Europe. That much is obvious. The scientific method came out of Reformation Europe. Well, you would think the Reformation would have had something to do with the scientific method, if indeed that's the time and the location of the birth of the scientific method. And indeed that is the case. What happened in the Reformation is that people began to publish Bibles in the languages of the people. People began to read the Bible for themselves. They got away from the idea that the priest was the only one qualified to read the Bible. Everybody had access to the Bible, and that included people who were interested in natural history. And as they looked at what the Bible said about natural history, they noted that the Bible, first of all, commanded objective testing in many places, and then actually showed us how to objectively test different parts of Scripture and different parts of the book of nature. And that was the birth of the scientific method. I've written about this in a couple of my books, but there's actually
right. What he's talking about is the scientific method actually comes from biblical thinkers, from people that believe in the Bible, Galileo and Newton, the Newtonian principles. All that goes back to people that were theists. They believed in God. These people that came up with the scientific method believed in God. Came up with modern science, that sparked modern science, believed in a deity, believed in the Most High, believed in the Bible. You understand? These people understood that, and the reason why is because they knew, according to the Bible, that the universe had to be constructed. You had to have what's called an anthropic principle. It was made for a reason, for a purpose, and they understood that if it was created, then the universe could be understood, and that's what started modern science. Started by theists, people that believed in the Most High, right? So that's very important to note. Muck the General says the old Earth theory is primarily based on pseudoscience of a Masonic devil, Charles Lyell, in his book Principles of Geology. They push these lies in an attempt to undermine the Bible. Well, right here, we're not pushing old Earth. I don't believe in millions of years the Earth that cannot be substantiated. That's all theory, pure theory at that. Like I brought out before, the magnetic field proves that the Earth can't be older than 100,000 years, because if you go back that far, it gets too damn strong and it rips the iron out your blood. Fresh biomaterial being found in fossils proves that the Earth is not that old. Again, flesh, biomaterial, blood vessels, stuff of that nature does not last. Keratin, the stuff your skin's made out of, your nails, it will not last more than 100,000 years. It will not last more than 10,000 years. You understand? It's going to decompose. So why are we finding this stuff in the ground on stuff like dinosaurs? Tyrannosaurus Rex. We found, blood vessels and blood cells. So we know that's not true. And I'm not pushing and advocating that. What I am pushing here is there are genealogical gaps in the Bible that will explain why Eridu being 7,000 years old, people are already there. This was after the flood. Egypt being established in the pre-dynastic Egypt and dynastic Egypt. That if you're saying that the flood happened 4,400 years ago, you have a problem, because the old kingdom was already established in Egypt. Sumer was already established before that. That's what this video is about. All right, let's continue.
Theologian by the name of Thomas Torrance, who founded the Scottish Academic Press for the express purpose of documenting the source of the scientific method. And over the course of a decade, published 28 volumes. So if you really want to see it in all of its gory detail, you can get the 28-volume set. So the big challenge on whether or not we can defend what the Bible says about Adam and Eve, where we take the biblical creation text as literal rather than as simply as figures of speech or talking about a completely different theological theme, really has to do with the date. And, I remember a few weeks ago I was with Fuzz Rana as we traveled up to Vancouver and spoke to the theologians at Regent Seminary and also at Trinity Western International University. And those are probably the two places in North America where you've got a really strong contingent of theologians saying that we cannot take what the Bible says about Adam and Eve literally anymore, because of the fact that it's quite clear that human genomics establishes a date for the birth of Adam and Eve that's incompatible with the literal reading of the Bible, and also especially incompatible with the idea that the entire human species is descended from two people. And that's really the crux of the debate. Can we defend what the Bible says, that the entire human species can be traced back to one couple, a literal Adam and Eve, that lived at a historical time in the relatively recent past? That's part of the debate. The other part of the debate is, can we defend what the Bible says concerning the timing of when God created Adam and Eve? And so this is what I want to look at. What does the Bible say about the date for Adam and Eve? What does the scientific evidence, the book of nature, say about the date for Adam and Eve? And what does the Bible say about us being descended from two individuals, Adam and Eve? And how does that can be reconciled, we know, from the study of genomics and other disciplines of science. There's been this presumption that the Bible teaches that the Garden of Eden is in Mesopotamia, and we're talking a few thousand years ago. And what I'm going to suggest is that the Bible actually gives us a different story than that. And this is going to really help in reconciling the book of nature and the book of Scripture. First of all, a biblical date for Adam. Now, if you're actually trying to go to the Bible and come up with an actual date for Adam, the only database you got are two genealogies, Genesis 5 and Genesis 11. The problem with those two genealogies, like all genealogies in the Bible, is that they're incomplete. No genealogy in the Bible is exhaustively complete. And this is where I think there's been some misunderstanding of how to reconcile the book of nature and the book of Scripture, are people looking at Genesis 5 and Genesis 11 and saying, well, actually, if you read the text there, it talks about Adam being born. He lives for a certain number of years, and he gives birth to a son, Seth. Then Seth lives so many years, and he gives birth to a son. And if you actually add up all the years, it's 1,656 years between Adam and between Noah. And then you look at the generations in Genesis 11, from Noah to Abraham. Again, we're looking at just a little less than 1,000 years to get down to Abraham. And Abraham lived about 4,000 years ago. And this is where people get the idea that Adam must have been created in 4004 BC. In fact, John Lightfoot in the Reformation era, based on his studies of the historical records of the Bible, said it was 4004 BC, October 23rd, 9 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So, and one of his peers said, well, couldn't you pin it down a little more accurately than that? So, now, what is not recognized amongst English language readers, and by the way, I've done a study on this, and the only places I've found in terms of theological research where people establish a date of like 4004 BC, it's always English language theologians. So, for example, you got James Usher, and you got John Lightfoot, both calculating a 4004 BC date. But notice, they're both English theologians. And if you actually look at it in the original Hebrew, the word for father, Ab, can also mean grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, etc. That's not the case with English. So, for example, people read Genesis 5 and it says the father. Well, they presume that's got to be the immediate male ancestor of that particular son. And by the way, it's also true of the word for son. The word son is ben, and in Hebrew, there's no distinction between a son, a grandson, a great-grandson, or a great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. I mean, they all would be translated into the one word ben. And so this is a problem for English language readers, and it's a problem that stems from the fact that we are used to an enormous vocabulary. And one of the problems of trying to interpret the Old Testament from an English language perspective, Biblical Hebrew is one of the smallest vocabulary languages that has ever been invented. If you don't count the names of people and names of cities and towns, you're looking at 3,000 words. Whereas in English, you're looking at 4 million words if you don't count the names of people and the names of cities and towns. It's still 4 million words. Although a caveat there is about half of those 4 million words are chemical terms. So a chemist has a vocabulary twice as large as the rest of us. But that still leaves 2 million words. In fact, to be fluent in English, you cannot be fluent in English unless you have a vocabulary of 100,000 words. So all of us here in this room would have a vocabulary that exceeds 100,000 words. And so that's 30 times bigger than the entire vocabulary of Biblical Hebrew. So no wonder that nouns in Hebrew have multiple literal definitions. And so, the word day that we have a big debate about, the biblical word for day, yom, has 4 different literal definitions. The biblical word for earth.
Hey, this is a point that he makes that I don't really agree with. I believe that the 6 creation days were 6 earthly days. So, this is where I kind of diverge from what Dr. Ross is saying. But I know a lot of people do rock with that, but I don't believe that that's the case, just from my studies. But hey, I just wanted you guys to see this video. I really wanted to get to the genealogical gaps part.
Earth, or rest, has 5 different literal definitions. And so when we speak about the earth, we can mean the entire planet, but it could also mean that portion of territory in your backyard. Same word, okay? It can mean a nation, it can mean a city, or it can mean the entire world, or literally your backyard would qualify. The word for heaven that's used in Genesis 1 has 3 different literal definitions, which explains why Paul in 1 Corinthians 11 told people how was taken to that's 2 Corinthians. He was taken to the 3rd heaven. So that his readers would understand, no, it's not definition 1 or 2, it's definition number 3. And so the word for father, again, has multiple literal definitions. And so you can refer to your great-grandfather as your father in biblical Hebrew. And likewise, you can refer to your great-great-great-grandson with the word ben. I mean, again, you only got 3,000 words to work with in the biblical Hebrew. And so in that sense, people have argued, well, could had Moses been clear in talking about these genealogies? Given the fact that he had to use Hebrew, he was as clear as he could be.
Exactly. So when you see the word beget or ben, doesn't always mean, or it says Jesus, son of David. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that he was the direct descendant, meaning that was his father, his real father, that reproduced with his mother and created him. No, it could just mean descendant.
And moreover, you can compare the genealogies and recognize what the text is really saying. As a number of scholars have pointed out, you could interpret the Genesis 5 and 11 genealogies that Adam gave birth to a son, grandson, or great son that started a line that ended in the name of the particular person. That's acceptable within the translation. Now here's evidence that indeed must be the correct way to interpret the text. You can go to the genealogy in Luke, which traces the line from Adam all the way to Jesus. And you can compare the Luke genealogy with the genealogy in Genesis 5. In the Genesis 5 genealogy, you've got 10 names running from Adam down to Noah. In the Luke genealogy, you've got 11 names. So an extra name is added. The name Canaan shows up in there. which doesn't show up in Genesis chapter 11. So it's evidence that, hey, at least one name must have been dropped. Something else you can pick up, too, is that if you compare Genesis 5 genealogy to the Genesis 11 genealogy, there's exactly 10 names in each list. Now, what is the probability that you would be breaking it between Adam and Noah and Abraham and coming up with exactly 10 names in each? Okay, that should give you a little clue. Then you look at the other genealogies and you notice that pattern repeats. So when you look at the genealogy, for example, in Luke, it breaks it down into 3 components. And it's 3 sets of 14 names. But if you compare the Luke genealogy, this is interesting. The Luke genealogy is more complete than the Genesis 5 genealogy, but the genealogies and chronicles are more complete than the Luke genealogy. So in Luke, you've got 3 sets of 14. In Chronicles, you've got way more than those names listed. And so in some cases, 4 names get dropped between a father and a son, which is okay because after all, the word son can mean great-great-grandson. So having 3 names missing is no big deal. But this is a pattern you see in the biblical genealogies. They like equal numbers. And so 3 sets of 14, 2 sets of 10. So I would tell you, okay, just like the 3 sets of 14 that you see in Luke, a whole lot of names got dropped in the actual genealogy. The 2 sets of 10 that you see in Genesis, chances are a bunch of names got dropped there as well. Now, and I could give you a name here, probably the one biblical scholar has done the most research on biblical genealogies, Old Testament genealogies, that would be Walter Kaiser. And his comment is, and by the way, we have a DVD there where Walt and I debated Ken Ham and Jason Lyle, and a good chunk of that debate was on the genealogies. And I remember at one point Walt Kaiser saying, "The Lord has delivered you into my hand," because his comment was, "This is my specialty. I mean, you're bringing up genealogies. I'm the expert on this." So, and then he went on to talk about why we can be confident that none of the biblical genealogies are complete. Now, it's because of they like the fact of equal numbers. The other thing we notice is that each genealogy is designed to teach the theological lesson. In fact, there's a theologian on our staff, Krista Bontrager. Her favorite texts of the Bible are genealogies. And people think she's kind of strange, but the point that Krista makes is this. Each genealogy tells you something important theologically by the names it includes and the names that it drops. And so you need to look at the genealogies and say who's included and who's not included and why. So, for example, some of the Old Testament genealogies make it a point to mention the women, and in particularly the Gentile women. Okay, what's the message there? The gospel is not just for the actual offspring, male offspring of Abraham, it's for everybody, including even these excluded Gentile women. Because in Jewish society at that time, the ones that were on the bottom tier were the Gentile women. And so notice that you've got a genealogy that makes it a point to mention the 2 Gentile women that are part of the descent down to King David. And so, they get special mention. At other times, it makes a point of picking out Gentile men. And so, in fact, Krista's whole point is there's a missiology message as you go through the genealogies in the Bible. Yes, Ross.
What you're saying makes sense. What I believe is the problem I have is the biggest question. What you're saying is correct. Adam is probably 50,000 years. That's going to put gaps in the genealogy between maybe hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. Is it really reasonable to believe that the culture that orally hands down that information over that long period of time?
Okay.
It puts like 45,000 years between Adam and Abraham.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're going to take this seriously, we're looking at a few tens of thousands of years back to Adam rather than just a few thousand years. And you're right, Ross, that means that a lot of names are getting dropped. We're not just dropping, I mean, people look at Luke and compare it with Genesis 5 and say, well, one's got 11 names, one's got 10 names. It means it must be mostly complete. But then you compare Luke with Chronicles, First Chronicles, you notice a whole bunch of names are missing from the genealogy in Luke. And so, what Walt Kaiser has pointed out, for example, is a challenge in biblical scholarship is trying to estimate how many names are dropped. Are we looking at 90% of the names being dropped, or 99% of the names being dropped, or 10% of the names being dropped? Well, a third point that Walter Kaiser makes, and he's not the only one, almost all Bible scholars will make this point, is that the texts are bringing out, quote, the heroes of faith. I mean, if you look at Hebrews chapter 11, Hebrews 11 is focusing on the Old Testament heroes of faith. Well, in one respect, the genealogies are designed to do that. So, for example, as you look at the Genesis 5 genealogies, those are the great patriarchs of the pre-flood era. And so those are the ones that God wants you to remember. These are the heroes that stand out. And given that what you see in Genesis chapter 6, where it talks about the people living in the days before the flood, the vast majority of humanity was in an incredibly wicked, reprobate state. What's a clue that those 10 names you see mentioned there, they're the exceptional ones. So we would expect that the vast majority would be dropped out of this. So the real problem here is, how do you go about trying to come up with a date? Maybe people have argued, for example, that Adam and Eve would go all the way back to, say, the first Homo erectus. Well, that puts you back about 2 million years. Is it possible to look at the biblical genealogies and get 2 million years out of it? Or are we really only looking at something like 100,000 years? How do we look at this? And so people have actually wrestled with us, because we got scientists saying that, Neanderthals are fully human. If that's the case, we got to accommodate, 150,000 years minimum. Is that even possible, looking at the genealogies? Well, a contribution we've made at Reasons to Believe is to say, okay, we got these genealogies. We really have no idea whether they're 90% complete, or 10% complete, or 1% complete, or less than 1% complete. As you compare the different genealogies, it's really difficult to bring, especially if it's simply focusing on the heroes of faith. Because after all, the majority of us would not make the list that we see in Hebrews chapter 11. So we would expect that the vast majority would be dropped. And one thing we also get is that in the days before the flood, people indeed were multiplying. But we have no archaeological evidence of people living in days before the flood, which tells us the human population at that time had to be relatively small. I figure at most it was a few million, and maybe it was less than a few million. But to keep the population down that low, given that you've got people with the capacity to live 930 years, as in the case of Adam, or 969 years, as in the case of Methuselah, I mean, that should lead to a very large population in short order. In fact, you can look at our book, The Genesis Question. I think this is also up on our website at reasons.org, where we calculate what the expected human population would be if everybody indeed was living as long as Adam and Methuselah, or the others that are mentioned. I mean, all of them except for Enoch lived past 700 years. So we're talking about people who lived a long time. If everybody was living 700 to 969 years, what kind of population would you expect? Well, what we have done is to show you that if you've got people that are reproductive for 500 or 600 years, and that's really what you're looking at. But here's the problem. Not everybody could have been living 800, 900 years, because if that was the case, by the time Adam was 700 years of age, there would have been 17 billion people on the face of the earth. Billion? A billion. So when God commanded Adam and Eve, multiply and fill the earth, they had the ability to do that in their own lifetime. It never happened because of what we see in Genesis 4. What do we see in Genesis 4? That's where Cain murders Abel, and if you read the rest of the chapter, you notice that Cain's descendants are murdering at a far higher rate than he did. And so murder became out of control. In fact, in order to explain why we don't have archaeological evidence of pre-flood humans, it means that the murder rate had to be at least 19 out of 20 people. So most people ended their life by being killed by their fellow man, not by natural causes. And so when you look at the genealogies in Genesis 5 and 11, genealogy in Genesis 5, these are the few survivors that actually are able to live out their whole natural lives. The vast majority of people were being snuffed out probably in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And in fact, I would argue that to explain the lack of evidence, right now, the world has the highest life expectancy. The average life expectancy of humans today is greater than it was in the days before the flood. The average. There were people like Methuselah and Adam that were living past 900 years, but the vast majority of people were being killed by their fellow man. Anyway, I've only got last 10 minutes here, and I got to leave early, so let me just show you what we've been able to do at Reasons to Believe and say, okay, if we're to look at the Genesis 5 and 11 genealogies, are there any individuals in those genealogies where we've got dates from outside the Bible? There's extra biblical evidence that establishes when these individuals lived. Well, you do. There's two individuals, Abraham and Peleg. Abraham is the last one mentioned in the Genesis 11 genealogy. Peleg is number 5 in the list of the 10 names from Noah down to Abraham. And for Abraham, his name is mentioned in the Sumerian and Akkadian genealogical records. And by the way, the Bible is not the only place where you get a genealogy for the first humans. You also have the Sumerians and the Akkadians giving a similar genealogy. And by the way, the Bible is not the only book that says that there were people living hundreds of years in the days before the flood. Again, both the Akkadian and Sumerian tablets claim that there was an ancient line of kings, patriarchs if you like, that were living much longer than people live today. Now, it's a little bit different in the Bible, and they claim that their ancient line of kings in the days before the flood were living more than 1,000 years each. And in some cases, they had them living almost 10,000 years. And so people say, well, that's not surprising. We have other evidence that the Akkadian and Sumerians distorted their history. This is just simply a distortion. What we have in the Bible is the actual real numbers. But nevertheless, it shows that the Bible is not alone in claiming that people in the days before the flood lived a long time. And it really would explain why human society was able to develop so quickly. If you've got people living for many, many generations, that means you've got a stream of knowledge that can be passed on generation after generation after generation. I wish I could talk to my grandfather, but he died when my father was 5. And so that counsel and wisdom never got brought down to me, but it would have been different if he had lived. And it really is a real help if you've got people living a long time in terms of being able to advance civilization. And so trying to explain why human civilization did advance at the rate that it did would fit people actually living that long. Okay, Abraham, we know from the Akkadian Sumerian tablets, lived about 4,000 years ago. And by the way, if you look at the historical records past Genesis 11, they tell you about Abraham down to Jesus. And it comes out to about 2,000 years. Again, if you look at the different historical records, you'll get a date. And so the dates agree. He lived about 4,000 years ago. Peleg, we know, lived about 11,000 years ago. And I'm a little bit out of time, so I'm going to have to cover this next time. But what does it say in Genesis 10:25? The world was divided in the days of Peleg. And what I'm going to show you next week is evidence that we have from geology of how the continents of the world were joined together at the close of the last ice age. And with the melting of the ice from the last ice age, the continents became separated. the world was divided in the days of Peleg. And we actually can date that with considerable precision as to when the land bridges joining the continents broke. There's a bridge that joined England, for example, to France, a bridge that joined Siberia to Alaska. And by the way, that bridge wasn't a small bridge, it was 500 miles wide. It was a big bridge. And we can date when that bridge broke and when it became impossible for pre-industrial revolution humans to travel from Siberia to Alaska or Alaska to Siberia. But we can document this around the world. And by the way, we're looking at sea level rises of over 500 feet that took place in a relatively short period of time. So we'll look at the geology that shows this, but most importantly, you get a date. We can pin down a date for when the world was divided in the days of Peleg, and if we know when Peleg lived, and we know when Adam lived, and the lifespans recorded in the text are proportional to the passage of time, then that puts Adam's birthday at roughly 60,000 years ago, give or take 30,000 years. You say, why such a huge error bar? I don't know if it's appropriate to presume that the passage of time is proportional to how long the patriarchs lived. If it's not, then you can get a different date. But that's probably the best we're going to do. And then we're going to look at that and how that ties into the cultural dates, the historical dates, and the DNA dates, and how we can go from there in dealing with these challenges to the origin of Adam and Eve, and whether or not we can trust the Bible for what it says about human origins.
All right, so that was the video. Just want to touch on a few things before I read this last article, then I'm going to let you guys go and have a good night. So, I know the audio wasn't that loud. I wish the video would have been a little louder for you guys, but I really wanted you guys to hear Hugh Ross's talking points. So pretty much he established the word Ben. When you see the word Ben, like Ben Issachar or something like that, or Ben Judah, it doesn't necessarily denote direct descendancy, meaning that that's your father of that lifetime, that this man actually, reproduced with your mother and made you. It doesn't always denote that. Biggest example is Christ being called the son of David. We understand that David didn't reproduce with his mother and create him. So that's a genealogical gap, from the time of David to the time of the Most High. The time of Christ, it's about 1,000-year gap. So when you look at Cush begatting, Cush begatting Nimrod, that could easily be a genealogical gap. And if you put Peleg at what he said around 11,000 years ago, and the flood being around that area of time, that epoch of time, you give enough time, you allot enough time for civilization to get started. These different cities like Eridu, agriculture to spread from the Levant, the Neolithic expansion into Europe, the city of Erech to build, pre-dynastic Egypt to the Nakaba period of Egypt, the Kadruka population in Africa to establish themselves. You give yourself enough time. If Peleg was there, and we know Abraham lived about 4,000 years ago, about 2,000 years before the Christ. You give yourself, like I said, what's that, about a 6,000-7,000 year window to get the world established, populated by the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That becomes the time window that is most plausible and most feasible than saying, oh, well, all this stuff happened within 100 years after the flood. Because that's the other model. The model is saying that the flood took place 4,400 years ago. And if you're saying that cities were established, because it says 6 cities, I think 6 cities were established by Nimrod. Let me fact check that real quick. Go into Genesis 10, where it talks about the cities. Right here, the sons of Cush. Cush begot Nimrod. He became a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty one of the Lord. Before the Lord, wherefore it said, even Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, in the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So not 6 cities, it's Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. So 4 four cities, and he had a kingdom in Babel, right? In Shinar. So this was already established. And then right after that, it says, out of the land went forth Asher to build Nineveh and the city of Rehoboth and Calah. So those cities was built too. In Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah, the same is a great city. So how many cities are this that it was established? You got Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and then you have Asher, Nineveh. You have Nineveh, Rehoboth, and Calah, and Rezin. That's what, four more cities? Four, Babel, Erech, Akkad. That's 8 cities being built within 100 years. It's just not enough time. We're saying that the tower, if you're saying the flood happened 4,400 years ago, 2,400 BCE, and they only 100 years passed since the time they got out the ark, you don't have enough time. You don't have a big enough population. You don't have enough resources and anything to, food, shelter, clothing, the things you need, child care, things you need to make a population of that size and sustain that population of that size. 100 years ain't gonna cut it. Putting Peleg around 11,000 years ago and the flood events around that time gives you enough time to establish all of those things. You know what I'm saying? Like the Maxipatahotep, that's going to the Old Kingdom. The Eblatites, that's going 2,500 BCE. That's cutting into that time frame. That's showing you that didn't happen during that time period. So I'm going to read some more literature for you guys, and I'm going to shut it down, all right? Watch this. Open the Chrome tab. The Genesis genealogies. Here we go. All right, so this is on Reasons to Believe as well by Dr. John Millam. In 1650, James Ussher, the Archbishop of Ireland, came up with a detailed timeline for all the events of the Bible, going all the way back to the creation of man in the universe. According to Ussher's chronology, Adam and Eve was created in the year 4004 BC. In order to date backwards from Abraham to Adam and Eve, he made use of the genealogies given in Genesis 5 and 11. A critical assumption that he made in his interpretation was that these two genealogies were complete. That is, that they contain no gaps or missing names. Are these genealogies indeed complete as Ussher assumed? Biblical genealogies are numerous, and yet they are probably the most often ignored and least studied portions of the Bible. Most people find genealogies to be uninteresting and difficult to apply to current circumstances. The nature and function of biblical genealogy is also very different from modern genealogies, which can be led to confusion and misunderstanding. For example, telescoping, leaving out some names for the sake of brevity, is common in biblical genealogies, but is rare in modern genealogies. Similarly, the key genealogical terms, such as son and father, have much broader meanings than their corresponding English words. An accurate understanding of biblical genealogies is difficult. It is important for understanding Scripture. Having a proper understanding of biblical genealogies is a prerequisite to attempting to address the Genesis genealogies. The nature of biblical genealogies. In modern times, genealogies are for the purpose of communicating detailed information about history and family relations. Our modern conception of genealogies is very different from how genealogies were used and understood in biblical times. Some background information on genealogies is helpful in order to properly understand and interpret them. Biblical genealogies fall into 3 main categories according to their purpose: familial, legal, political, and religious. Familial or domestic genealogies were primarily concerned about inheritance and privileges of firstborn sons. Legal and political genealogies are primarily centered on claims to be hereditary office, but others include establishing ancestry for land organization. Territorial groupings and military service. Religious genealogies were primarily used to establish membership in the Aaronic and Levitical priesthoods. The function of genealogy largely determines its structure and organization in each of these cases. There is little reason or need to give a complete listing of names, since it's ancestry, not actual number of generation, that is important. And that's what we find, commentary on this, that's what we find in the biblical narrative. In Genesis 10, it's not important to list every member or descendant, but it's important to establish the ancestry. Bringing up Nimrod was important to establish that he came from Cush, to let you know that that's his lineage. Didn't need to bring everybody in between Cush and him. And that's for brevity's sake, because if you did do that, you probably have a long chapter. Very short genealogies are typical for the purpose of identifying person's tribal or genealogical grouping. The clearest example of this is the division of Israel into tribes, according to which the 12 patriarchs they were descended from. This tribal division was important for determining traveling arrangements, Numbers 2 and 10, and allocations and land, Joshua 13:21. Each tribe was subdivided into divisions and further subdivided into clans according to the son and grandson of the patriarchs they were descended from. For example, the Levites were assigned different duties according to which Levitical division they belonged to. So it was usually sufficient to list only a person's tribe, division, and clan to identify someone. This interest in genealogical identification is also seen in the time of King David and again in the time of the return from the exile. These latter times, genealogies often were given in terms of either key historical figures, Aaron, Moses, David, etc., rather than going all the way back to the patriarchs. For example, Matthew starts his gospel with Jesus, son of David, son of Abraham. This is very terse genealogy. This very terse genealogy is a prelude to Matthew's longer genealogy, Matthew 1:3-17. Some examples include Moses and Aaron, Numbers 26, 57, 59. We covered Moses and Aaron, showing that Moses could not have been, his father Amram could not have been a direct descendant of Kohat, meaning Kohat didn't reproduce with Amram's mother to create him. No, that's not what we see there. That's just stating that he is of the ancestry of the Kohats, or the man Kohat. He's of that ancestry. He is a descendant of him. You understand? So right here, with Moses and Aaron playing such central roles in the Exodus, it is not surprising that their genealogy is given 4 different times in the Old Testament. This genealogy serves as a striking example of telescoping genealogy to include only the tribe, division, and clan. The genealogies defining the division and clans of the Levites are given in Numbers, the 3rd chapter, in the 26th chapter, in 1 Chronicles 6. We see from these passages that Moses and Aaron were of the tribe of Levi, the Levites, the division of Kohath, and the clan of Amram, the Amramites. These genealogies were telescoped to only include the 3 generations needed to establish this. A more detailed study of these genealogies is given later. You got Korah right here in the second census during Israel's desert wandering. A noteworthy individual are listed along with each tribe's genealogy. Korah, the son of Izhar, son of Kohath, the son of Levi, led a rebellion against Moses during the desert wandering and was engulfed by the earth along with the followers. This genealogy specifies his clan, Izhar, division, Kohath, and tribe, and telescopes out the remaining generations between Korah and Izhar. See that? So again, it just established the ancestry that this man came from Levi. It's not giving you every descendant of Levi leading up to him. Dathan and Abiram, same thing. Along with Korah, Dathan and Abraham participated in the rebellion against Moses and died with him. Because this is noteworthy, Dathan and Abiram are listed among the Reubenites in the second Israelite census. In this genealogy, we are only given their clan, Eliab, division, Palu, and tribe, Reuben. Zelophehad's daughters in Numbers 26. Zelophehad and his daughters are listed as noteworthy among the Manassites in second census of Israel because he had 5 daughters and no sons. They came to Moses about the issue of the inheritance. As a result, it became a law that a daughter would receive the inheritance if there were no sons. This genealogy, Zelophehad, son of Hefer, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, is analogous to the preceding examples, except that one more name is included beyond the tribe, division, and clan. Then word meaning is another argument that we can go over. Another important difference between ancient and modern genealogies is vocabulary. In modern English, we have a whole host of words relationships. For example, we have son, grandson, uncle, father, cousin, brother, and ancestor. Hebrew was a very small vocabulary, so only a few Hebrew words to carry all these modern meanings. For example, the Hebrew words for son, ben, means son, grandson, great grandson, and descendant. Similarly, father means father, grandfather, great grandfather, and ancestor. We find in Genesis 28:13 that God tells Jacob, I am the Lord, the God of your father, Abraham, and the God of Isaac. But Abraham was the grandfather of Jacob. So again, he's showing you there's latitude to this word. It can apply to father, grandfather, or ancestor. Abba can refer to multiple ancestors, as when Elijah cried, take my life, I am no better than my ancestors. According to the 1 Kings 19:4, according to the vines, Abba may refer to the first man and forefather of a clan. Jeremiah 35:6, a tribe. Joshua 19:47, a group with a special calling. 1 Chronicles 24:19, a dynasty. 1 Kings 15:3, or a nation. Thus, father does not necessarily mean the man who directly sired a given individual. Vine's father, but also HGKSB, page 1574. Similar words usage also applies to the New Testament in Greek, such as the genealogies of Matthew and Luke. The word begot is another word that's commonly used in biblical genealogies. The NIV translates Yalad as become the father of or gave birth to. Like father and Ab and son, being, this word has a much broader meaning than the corresponding English uses vines to bear. An example of this broader usage is found in Deuteronomy 32:18, where God reminds Israel that he begot them. And similarly in Numbers 11:12, where Moses declared that he hadn't begotten Israel and hence was not responsible for them. Numerous examples of this broad use of genealogical terms can be given from scripture, but a few clear examples are given here. He uses Daniel 5, where it says Belshazzar is described as a son of Nebuchadnezzar, and likewise Nebuchadnezzar is called his father. However, Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus, and hence not even biologically related to Nebuchadnezzar. So Belshazzar was son in the sense of a legal heir of Nebuchadnezzar. Then they use Ruth, the 4th chapter, in the 17th verse. In the end of the book of Ruth, Boaz and Ruth had their first son, Obed. In verse 4 and 17, the people declares there is a son born to Naomi. Clearly, Naomi was not the actual mother of Obed, but she is the mother-in-law of Ruth, who is the actual mother of Obed. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, and her 2 sons died, leaving Elimelech and Naomi without heirs. Boaz married Ruth in the fulfillment of the Levirate law, which was enacted to ensure sons to continue the family line in Deuteronomy 25. The first son of the Levirate marriage was legally the son of the dead husband. In this case, since Ruth's father-in-law, Elimelech, was also dead, Obed was also legally the son of Elimelech and Naomi. So Obed was the legal son of Naomi, but the biological son of Ruth. Matthew 1:12 and Luke 3:27 as well, they use these same themes, right? It says in both Matthew and Luke, Zerubbabel is listed as the son of Shealtiel. In 1 Chronicles 3:17-19, we find that Zerubbabel was actually the son of Shealtiel's brother Pedaiah. While it's not stated in the Bible, it is reasonable to assume that Pedaiah died early and that his uncle Shealtiel adopted Zerubbabel. So Pedaiah was the biological father of Zerubbabel, but Shealtiel was his legal adoptive father. We see this example in 1 Chronicles, and we also see it in Genesis. I'm not going to read all of them, but you can see that this theme is replete throughout the Bible. And let's get to these telescoping of genealogies. When names are intentionally left out of a genealogy, it is referred to as telescoping. In a telescope genealogy, only the highlights are given, using the names of most important and relevant people. As an example, if we were to telescope Abraham was the father of Isaac, who was the father of Jacob, it might read in Hebrew, Abraham was the father of Jacob. For example, Genesis 28:13. Remember, whenever you see that EG, that's talking about, for example. In English, this telescope genealogy would be considered erroneous and should read grandfather instead. In Hebrew, and similarity of Greek, this telescope genealogy would be perfectly true and acceptable because there is no separate word for grandfather in Hebrew, and the word father, Abba, includes the meaning grandfather. Typically, when genealogy is telescoped, the number of names is reduced to an aesthetically pleasing number, usually a multiple of either 7 or 10, and less important names are omitted until the number is reached. For example, the genealogy of Genesis 4 to 17:18 contains 7 names. Genealogies of Genesis 5, 3 to 32, 11, 10, and 26, and Ruth 4:18 to 22 all have 10 names each. The genealogy of the nations, Genesis 10, 1 Chronicles 1, 5 through 23, contains 70 names. Matthew arranged his genealogy into 3 groups of 14 names each. There are 14 names of Abraham and David, from David to the exile, and 14 from the exile to Jesus Christ. To get the groups of 14, Matthew omitted at least 4 names and counted Jeconiah's name twice. Matthew clearly indicates that the gospel that the arrangement was intentional, whereas Matthew's genealogy is broken into sections. Luke's genealogy is given as a single list. Luke has 14 names from Abraham to David, 21 from David to the exile, and 21 from exile to Jesus Christ, in contrast to Matthew's 14 names each. Luke also has an additional 21 names from Abraham back to Adam. While modern genealogies are generally intended to be complete, most biblical genealogies are telescoped. So while biblical genealogies are generally not complete, they are still historically accurate. They correctly communicate everything that we need to know, ancestry, but not necessarily everything we want to know, absolute genealogical relationships. It is often very difficult, even impossible, to know with certainty whether or not a given genealogy is telescoped. The genealogies themselves give little or no indication of whether or not they are telescoped. So the only way to establish completeness of genealogy is to compare it with other biblical genealogies or against history. Such study is difficult, painstaking, and often inconclusive. Below are listed few well-known examples where one definitely say they are telescoped. Matthew 1:8 compared to 2 Chronicles 21:4, 26-23 says Matthew 1:8 has Jehoram listed as the father of Uzziah, but there were several generations between these men. This is what I was trying to tell y'all. When you see genealogies in a book, like with Cush and Nimrod, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the same generation. That doesn't mean that that's the man that copulated with his mother to create him. It's just establishing ancestry, right? 2 Chronicles 24-27 come between Jehoram and Uzziah. Matthew 1:11 compared to 2 Chronicles 36 and 1 through 9. In Matthew 1:11, we read that Josiah is the father of Jeconiah. In 2 Chronicles, we see that Josiah was the father of Jehoiakim and grandfather of Jehoiakim. All right, so Luke 3:36 compared to Genesis 10:24, 11, and 12. 1 Chronicles 1:24. Luke contains the name of Canaan between Shelah and Arphaxad that is missing in Genesis 10:24, 11, 2, and 1 Chronicles 1:24. Since all genealogies are true and Luke is one with more names, then Luke must be a more complete and more and the more rest telescope. So the rest of them were telescope. And more detailed discussion of these genealogies is given in the section of Genesis genealogies. Ezra 7, 1 through 5 compared to First Chronicles. So you can see that this lineage, this theme is repeated, telescoping. So right here it says estimating the degree of telescoping based on the above discussion and biblical examples. We can see that telescoping of genealogies was a fairly common practice in ancient times. Such telescoping is perfectly acceptable and literal based on Hebrew word usage, even if it may be disconcerting to modern readers. We can also see that it's usually impossible to tell from the genealogy itself whether or not it's complete. For a few genealogies, we can establish specific names that have been omitted and where they belong in the list. In general, however, the genealogy only establishes a minimal limit to the number of generations span. We have to look at other portions of scripture or history to estimate the degree of telescoping involved. While the degree of telescoping in particular genealogy may be uncertain, it is certainly not arbitrary or unlimited. Upper limits on how far genealogy might be pushed can be reasonably estimated by looking at the biblical examples for which can establish time span involved. Conservative biblical scholars estimate that genealogies are generally not less than 10% complete, including only one name in 10 based on such analysis. All right, so I'm gonna stop it there. I don't want to go too late tonight. So I ran all that to just show and explicate to you guys that going off of direct genealogies is not wise. like with the situation Genesis 10 where it says Cush begot Nimrod. Again, that doesn't mean Cush copulated. Doesn't have to mean that Cush copulated with his mother and produced him in that generation. That could have been simply written that way to establish ancestry, which would mean that there is a genealogical gap in the book of Genesis 10 and 11. And that genealogical gap gives enough time for the earth to be repopulated, for civilization to be established, for farming to reach Europe, the Middle East, and Northern Africa, and Egypt to be established in the Naqada period, pre-dynastic Egypt established, early Mesopotamia and Sumer, Erech to be built. It gives them enough time, and then Abraham comes in the scene around 4,000 years ago. So, again, in conclusion, we're 3 hours in. I'm not doing another 8-hour live tonight. In conclusion, the earth is not 6,000 years because of these things that we find. It just doesn't conform with, like I said, the Neolithic Revolution, Eridu, Erech, Mesopotamia, the establishment of writing, Proto-Afro-Asiatic languages coming into the scene. I didn't mention that, but that's another thing that we know when that came into the scene and when it started to spread about 10,000 years ago, so on and so forth. So we have to give ourselves a window to allow society to build and form. And like I said, it's 8 cities mentioned in Genesis 11, 8 cities built by a small, very small population within 100 years. It's not happening. It's not happening. And right after the earth was destroyed, no, that's not happening. And those are my reasons against the earth being 6,000 years old, and also my reasons against the flood being happening 4,400 years ago, 400 years before we see Abraham pop up on the scene. So with that, I'm going to say shalom. I bid you guys farewell. Source Gang, 7 Gang over everything. You know I'm rocking, man. Let's go. Let's go. Let's close out, man. Let's close out with what y'all want to listen to. What y'all want to listen to? Let's go. How about the CEO? How about the CEO, man? Let's do that. Let's do that. I can bring his song up. And of course, I'm not gonna be able to find it, right? Because I don't want to. You know how that go. I want to bring it up now. I ain't gonna be able to find this song. We're gonna play the CEO Jeremiah Yah. Please say the Yah. Close it out. And of course, it doesn't. But I will, later on, for all those that didn't, grasp it, it was 3 hours long. I could easily, shorten this up and summarize this up in PowerPoint form and create the PowerPoint for you guys. And maybe it'd be more digestible than, watching videos and spreading it out 3,000 years. It's just something I wanted to cover. I thought about it this morning, had a discussion about it yesterday. So I want to make sure I got it out there on the on the airways for you brothers and sisters. All right, let me pull this up and then we can end it. And you guys can get some sleep. I know I'm going to get some sleep. All the brothers and sisters that got jobs, I know you feel me. All right, hold on. There we go. There it is. All right. Love y'all. Shalom.
Greetings to you all. I've been sent here to do great things, amazing things, beautiful things, positive things, blessing things, healing things, loving things, happy things, for the rebuilding of the new world, the blessing of the world, to build the kingdom here of the Most High God here on earth. Blessings to you, sending you love and positive vibrations around the world. Blessings to you and welcome. Most motivation. start with devastation. You must fall before you rise. They want a demonstration. I'm here to get it all right before I spend it all. The elderly come and see the youth. They need to get involved. I want the finer things, in love with shiny things, descended from black royalty, so you can blame my veins. I just call it blessings. I got the right perspective. If I see myself going off, I'm just gonna change direction. I love the brotherhood with all the flaws of brotherhood. I ain't gotta say a damn word and know it's understood. Yeah, we make mistakes, but that's what makes us great. Learn how to accept apology without acting fake. I know the pot is hot because you're grudge bearing. A lot of niggas going blind because their sun is staring. They on a mission to dim the light, we call it tail bearing. The Lord said thou should not covet, but he's still staring. And now I'm mortified with all the sins that multiply. Got your brother crying at the wall like a Mordecai. I'm really horrified. A lot of brothers are feminized. They really start to bug my damn nerves. I use pesticide.
Unlearn, relearn, and apply. Get your blessings from the Most High. Matthew 7:7, seek and you shall find. If you not, it shall be open wide. Blessings. Hey, get your blessings. Hey, Deuteronomy 28:2-3. All these blessings shall come upon thee. All these blessings shall overtake thee. Get your blessings, hearken to thee. Blessed shall thou be in the field. Blessed shall thou be in the city.
I push your Range Rover until the rain's over. Dying from an overdose of hate, man, he can't stay sober. But it's not the car, it's my spirit, man. Claiming that he show brotherly love, but he never does. There's no greater wealth than your family's health. Gather all the negativity and put it on the shelf. And it's nothing wrong when you have success. A father leave inheritance to his children, that man is blessed.
Unlearn, relearn, and apply. Get your blessings from the Most High. Matthew 7:7, seek and you shall find. If you knock, it shall be open wide. Blessings. Hey, get your blessings. Hey, Deuteronomy 28:2-3. All these blessings shall come upon thee. All these blessings shall overtake thee. Get your blessings, hearken unto thee. Blessed shall thou be in the field. Blessed shall thou be in the city.
All right, man. 7 Gang, Source Gang. Y'all know the slogan, man. Stay tuned. We'll be going live tomorrow. So stay tuned. We'll be back with you guys to feed y'all some content. You know, we rocking, man. Gang.